everyone! I'm Jack. Panda, obviously. How are you all doing? Nice to see you all. And hiya Claire, hiya Krista. How are you both? Hope you're both doing well. And I hope you're excited. Well, I'm excited anyway. Mostly because I always like reading, well, anything in general really. Visual novels, books. It's one of my favourite things. Doesn't make me very exciting, but I like to read. So yeah. How are you both doing? Good. What you been up to? Dead from gym. Well, I hope you worked out hard enough to warrant being dead. And how was work? How'd that go? I hope it went easy on you. Oh, and yeah, now I'm affiliate now. And I've got new little emote things to do. Not emotes. Sound things and no, whatever they're called, little redeem things, which I think is kind of cool. But you'll have to try them out and see, and let me know. I don't know if there's anything else I should add, or any other ideas people can come up with. But I'm pretty happy with what I've got so far. Yeah, I don't know what is wrong with that. I don't know how that works, because sometimes it seems to be lowerable, other times it cannot. And it seems to be completely random. So I have no idea. And Twitch doesn't seem to know either. I don't know how it works. So I'm afraid I can't help you there. Yeah. But yeah, today we're going to be continuing Red Dwarf, Infinity Welcomes Careful Drivers. I think I'm all dressed up for the occasion properly. Aside from the cup of tea, I just like having that here because we all need a cup of tea. We all should have a cup of tea. We should all be drinking tea. But otherwise, I've got my Starbug, and I've got the title here. So I think we're all prepared. We were on Chapter 8 of Part 1, which was Your Own Death and How to Cope with It. And... Oh, thank you, Claire. Thank you very much. I need to set stuff up for that as well. Thank you. I wasn't expecting to be cheered on my first stream, but thank you very much. But also, don't cheer me. Save your money. Oh, that would be why then. That sucks. But also, yeah, save your money, Claire. I appreciate it, but thank you. Really, keep your money. There are other people you can spend it on, like yourself. But yeah, thank you, all the same. But yeah, so, well, even so, save it. Spoil yourself. Really. But yeah, so last we left off, Lister had just been to the Space Corps in order to sign up in hopes that he could find a way back to Earth via a space journey, via his mining mission. And we're about to go and pick him up. So, here we go. Shuttle flight JMC 159 for White Giant now boarding at gate number 5, the tannoy announced, and proceeded to make the same announcement in Esperanto, German, and 3 different dialects of Chinese. A group of miners stubbed out their cigarettes and finished their beers, then reluctantly swung their kit bags over their shoulders before joining a group of white-suited officers and some grey-suited technicians in the queue to Gate 5. 2 shore patrol officers strode through the milling crowds, casually swinging their argument settlers. People pretended not to look at them. You didn't mess with the shore patrol, not unless you wanted your skull rearranged to resemble a relief map of Mars, canals and all. This has got to be a joke. This is the address we were given, said the blonde. They stopped at the huge bank of luggage lockers and looked around, searching for number 4179. The dark-haired one banged on the door. This has got to be a joke, she repeated. Lister was awakened from a dream about a pickle sandwich that spoke fluent Italian by the deafening metallic clanging as shore patrolwoman Henderson beat the luggage locker door with her steel truncheon. It's a joke, I'm telling you. Hang on, called Lister. Let me get dressed. In the confined space of the locker, which was designed to accommodate 2 smallish suitcases, he groped around in the blackness, located his clothes, and pulled on his coffee and upholstery polish-stained trousers. Who is it? Shore Patrol, we're here looking for a guy called Lister. I'll see if he's in, called out Lister, stalling for time. Why do you want him? He's been assigned. They found him a ship. The door opened and Lister jumped the 6 feet down to the ground. He cupped his chin in one hand, placed the other on the back of his neck, and snapped his head to one side to the accompaniment of a series of stomach-churning cracks. Your papers have come through, said Henderson, and... Wait a minute, said Lister. I can't see yet. Give me a minute. He blinked a few times and rubbed his eyes. Slowly, the 2 shore patrolwomen came into focus. Hi, said Lister. I'd invite you in, but there's a bit of a mess. It's more of a bachelor luggage locker than... Hiya, Ollie. How you doing? Nice to see you. And what juice have you got? How long have you been sleeping in there? Henderson interrupted. Since my second night on Mimas. I tried sleeping on a park bench, but I woke up in the middle of the night completely naked, and this old Chinese guy was licking my foot. So, compared with that, this is the Mimas Hilton. No work permit, right? I have actually, but it belongs to a woman called Emily Birkenstein. It's a long story. Get your stuff together. I've got my stuff together. Where is it? In my pocket. They walked back across the shuttle lounge towards the departure gates. Grape juice is good. I like it. Oh, okay. Well, I hope you're enjoying your day off. Oh, good. I'm glad everyone's prepared and everyone has their refreshments. Good. Hopefully this will be a comfy stream for everyone then. I did, yeah. I was very excited. I didn't know what to do to celebrate, but I am getting emotes made. So they'll hopefully be ready by next week, I hope. So yeah, look forward to that, I suppose. Or I will, anyway. We've got to deliver you to gate 9. Time for breakfast. If you make it quick. Lister peeled off from his escort and, without ever stopping, walked through the nice and noodly quick food bar, picking up a half-eaten soya sandwich and a 3/4 finished noodle burger that people with weaker constitutions had left behind. You're probably thinking I'm a slob, said Lister, finishing off a quintuple thick milkshake and hoovering around the base with a straw. But I'm not. I'm just hungry, okay? Oh, well, I just got suggested what they should be by a couple of friends, so I'm pretty happy with them. In the ones in progress, anyway. They said I should just get things that are themed to my, to the playing cards, so it's what I've done. Just different jack faces with different suit eyes. Like I've got, like rah, and rah, and rah. And also that. Yeah. Hey, it's a real pity you've got to go on this ship and everything, said Henderson, because otherwise you could maybe have taken me out for dinner. A couple of half-eaten egg rolls, maybe root through the bin for the remnants of a Kentucky Fried Chicken, then back to your place for half a bottle of paraffin. It could have been so romantic. I'd say playing card vibes. Not really Persona vibes, but yeah, fair enough. Well, listen, said Lister, totally missing the irony. I'm not exactly married to the spaceship idea. Why don't we do it? Just promise not to bring your steel truncheon. Oh, that's one thing I'll have to do, yeah. I'll get a Uno reverse Giacomo. That'd be cool. To Ganymede and Titan, yes sir, I've been around. But there ain't no place in the whole of space like that good old toddlin' town. Luna City 7, you're my idea of heaven. Out of 10, you score 11. You good old artificial terraformed settlement. Through the shuttle's tinny sound system, Perrien Cuomo, the African ballad singer, was crooning one of the many easy listening hits from his best-selling album, Nice and Nauseating. Lister sat in the packed shuttle with the rest of the new recruits on the 25-minute jag up to their assigned ship, gazing out from his window seat as Mimas dropped away below him like a bad taste he'd spat into the night. He thumbed through the shuttle's in-flight magazine, up, and away. He stared for a brief moment at the blistering, unpromising contents page. Salt, an epicure's delight, classic wines of Estonia, and weaving the traditional way were just some of the more fascinating articles. How is it possible, Lister wondered, to fill a 120-page magazine without actually including anything remotely readable? He tucked it back into the netting of the seat in front of him and decided to read the plastic card containing the crash landing instructions for the second time. The shuttle buzzed slowly through the groups of gargantuan space freighters that bobbed in orbit like a bunch of clumsy balloons. Aerodynamics were never a consideration in starship design. All the ships were constructed in orbit, designed never to land, never to encounter wind resistance or gravity, and were consequently a variety of bizarre and outlandish shapes. For 5 full minutes, the shuttle ran alongside a supply ship called the Arthur C. Clarke, a 2-mile length of dirty grey steel, orange lights dotting the huge bulbous cargo hold, out of which sprang a long, thick, tubular nose section, curling and twisting like the stem of an oriental hookah. That's a hooker as in the smoking thing. Eventually, the shuttle reached the cusp of the star freighter's bulb and turned. Lister's window was filled with red. And red. And red. He couldn't see where it started, and he couldn't see where it finished, but it was big. No, it was big. A big, red, big, clenched fist of metal. As the shuttle accelerated through the redness, details slowly emerged through the thick gloom of space. Gradually, Lister made out the thousands of tiny pinpricks of windows and a tooth-floss-thin line of light ringing the ship, the vessel's metro system. A huge shadowy carbuncle jutted out a mile or so from the red monster's belly. A small moon, torn out of orbit, had flung itself into the ship's solar plexus and was now embedded in the hull, hanging there like a giant stone leech. As the shuttle swung itself out to align itself for docking, the red ship's nose cone loomed into view. 6 half-mile steel poles bound by magnetic cable, as if the fist were clutching a huge shuttlecock. This was the scoop. The scoop sucked hydrogen from the currents of space and converted it into fuel, theoretically making the ship capable of travelling forever. Lister was aware of the hot whiskey breath of the burly Astro beside him, who was now leaning over to share his window. "The Dwarf," he said in a Danish accent, opening another can of Glen Fujiyama. "The what?" Lister tried not to inhale. "Oh, thank you, Ollie. Yeah, I'm very glad, and I'm very happy too. Given that the story of Old Man Henderson. I'll read just about anything if people want me to. I've even got what's it called? I've even got a new redeem thingy. I mean, not the same, I know, but repeat after me. So if people have things they want me to say, then you can spend a redeem and get me to say something. Just, keep it PG-13. But yeah, thank you, Ollie. I doubt I'm going to be partner anytime soon. I'm even surprised that I got to affiliate as quickly as I did, but it was a lot of thanks to you guys and to people like Hater and Zvar who encouraged people to come and watch. So yeah, I'm very thankful to everyone, and it means a lot, especially given that my first couple of streams were like badly presented Power Wash Simulator videos in tiny resolution. Hello, Kato. How are you doing? What's up? Nice to see you here. Hello. Hello to you. I'm glad they can already get used. Yeah, I'm good, thank you. I'm just reading, just chatting for a bit and then reading some more. Yeah, exactly. But it means a lot. So I'm very glad that people thought it was worth helping out. It's very kind of them. Anyway. Red Dwarf. How big is it? It could eat Copenhagen, said the Dane, and have Helsinger for afters. Lister accepted a belt from the whiskey can, and they swapped names. It's got to be 5 miles long. Something like that, said Peterson. Lister squinted out the window again. And God, is it ugly? Ugly as my mother. Peterson smiled through the barb-raw broken teeth. First trip? Lister nodded. Peterson belched, crumpled up the whiskey can, tossed it into the aisle, and fished in his knapsack for another. I'd offer you one, he said apologetically, but I have only 12 left. Been on Mimas long. 6 months. It's a bit of a dump, right? It's a lot of a dump. Wait till we get to Triton. Triton's okay. Triton? Lister's brow furrowed. We're going to Earth? Sure, we're going to Earth, but first we've got to go to Triton to get the ore to take to Earth. Lister closed his eyes. Where's Triton? Round Neptune. Oh, said Lister. Neptune, right. He took a swig from Peterson's nearly empty whiskey can. Where's Neptune? From here. Peterson took out a calculator. I'll tell you exactly. He punched a lot of numbers into the machine. It's 2,707,000,000 miles away. Lister sighed like a burst tyre. How long is that going to take? Say 18 months, said Peterson. 18 months, not counting customs, and Triton immigration control is a son of a bitch. It's worse than New York. 18 months. Then 12 months mining. 12 months mining? Then 2 more years to get back to Earth. 4.5 years. It's an old ship. It only does 2,000 miles an hour. 200,000 miles an hour. 4.5 years? Lister repeated like a mantra. 4.5 years? He turned and looked out the window as the shuttle ducked into the trench cut deep into Red Dwarf's back. On either side, buildings flitted past. Skyscrapers, tower blocks 100 stories high, monoliths of steel and glass. 1 minute, it was as if they were flying through Manhattan. Then, without warning, the architecture changed, and it looked like Moscow. Then fluted pillars and elaborate neo-classic arches, and they could have been in New Athens, a tasteless mishmash of styles from the decades upon decades the vast mining ship had taken to build. For a tantalizing moment, between a huge mosque-shaped dome and a line of industrial chimneys, the tiny blue light that was Earth winked and flickered invitingly in the glow of the distant sun, then just as suddenly was gone as they swooped towards the yawning doors of the docking bay. 4.5 years, said Lister catatonically. Oh yeah, to be honest, I didn't know how mine should be either. I just looked around on the internet for different suggestions. I thought they turned out quite good, but I'd still like more. But I just don't know what to add. So yeah, I wanted to have one that was, I've also got some bot bot commands as well. I think ! Gambling is one of them, but I don't know how it works. Oh, you just go into the redeems page on your Twitch thing. At least that's what I did. Chapter 9. Lister pushed through the crowded docking bay, fighting his way into the intake clearance zone. Now moronically drunk Peterson in tow. They'd been stopped at Red Dwarf Customs and Peterson had been bag searched. His possessions had comprised a toothbrush, 1 pair of underpants, 3 socks, and 11 cans of whiskey. Informed that he couldn't bring the liquor aboard without paying duty, he had stood in the Green Channel and downed all 11 cans, one after the other, offering Lister a sip a can. Now Peterson was walking sideways, his head cocked at a curious angle, singing a lewd Danish folk song, punctuated with appropriate gestures and slobbering leers, as Lister dragged him by his lapel through the moving walkway. High above, the dominating ship's shuttle port was a monitor screen the size of a football pitch, from which a disembodied head was lugubriously dispensing information. The head was a digitalised reproduction of a balding 40-year-old man with a voice that had a slight East London twang. "The floors stopped moving," said Peterson as they reached the end of the walkway. "That's a very good thing." Lister scanned the various name cards that Red Dwarf induction staff were holding above the heads of the jostling crowd. "Hi, I'm Chomsky." "Chomsky? Pierre, right?" Rogerson ticked his clipboard. "Okay, stand there a second. We're still looking for Burrows, a Peterson, a Schmidt, and a Lister." "I'm a Lister," said Lister. "I'm going to be sick," said Peterson. And he was. Exorcist sick. "Yeah. Yeah." A pause. A sigh. "Yeah. Yeah." Peterson smacked his lips and wiped his face with the back of his sleeve. "That's better." 2 scutters, claw-headed service droids, which looked like miniature amputee giraffes on motorised bases, swept into view and cleaned up the mess. Peterson tried to tip them. "We're still looking for a Burrows and a Schmidt," Rogerson said, trying to disguise his disgust. "What's that thing?" asked Lister, pointing up to the disembodied head on the computer screen. "Holly, the ship's computer. He's got an IQ of 6,000. You want to ask him a question?" "Like what?" "Like anything at all." Rogerson called up to the ceiling. "Hey, Holly, this is Lister." The huge eyes rolled down in their direction. "I know. Lister, David. Date of birth, 14th of October, 2155. Qualifications, GCSE Technical Drawing, failed. Rank, Technician 3rd class. Ambitions to visit strange new worlds, to seek out new life and new civilizations, to boldly go where no person has gone before. All right, Dave." A huge eyelid rolled down over the digital eye and winked at Lister. "Ask him something," Rogerson urged. "Who holds the all-time record for 3-dimensional yardage in a single 0G football season?" "Jim Bexley Speed, London Jets roof attack, season 74 to 75. 4,636 square yards in a regular season. And what colour tie was he wearing when he was interviewed by Mark Matheson after Mega Bowl 102? Aquamarine with a diagonal lemon stripe." "Brutal," Lister grinned. Chomsky chipped in. "Who was the Chinese emperor of the Ming dynasty in 1620? Tai Chang," Holly replied immediately, "also known as Chu Chang Lo Kwang Sung." I probably murdered that, I apologise. "Born 1582. They all began shouting questions. "Who was the... How many... When did..." And one by one, Holly got them all right. Finally, Peterson asked the question. "Why is the room going round and round?" "Because you're drunk," said Holly. "That's right," Peterson clapped, delighted. Burrows and Schmidt finally arrived, and the 10 of them were herded into the Red Dwarf's northern line, one of a network of tube trains which crisscrossed the length and breadth of the ship. Spread evenly throughout the carriage were more monitors displaying the genius computer, who was capable of conducting several thousand conversations simultaneously, ranging from what was on the ship's movie channel that night to discussing the melding of quantum mechanics and general relativity. Some 30 minutes later, they boarded the express superlift, which whisked them up to floor 9172, where they were met by a ship rover, a 3-wheeled electric buggy bus, and driven down 2 miles of corridors towards the sleeping quarter, Area P. "Okay," said Rogerson, showing Lister into his sleeping quarters. "Make yourself at home. I'll just go and fix up the other guys." Lister looked around the room, which was going to be his home for the next 4.5 years. Dull, gunmetal grey walls reflected his mood. Neon strips around the walls simulated the time of day. Dirty yellow at the moment signalled the middle of the afternoon. A dirty orange would signal early evening, and a dirty blue would indicate night. 2 bunk cubicles were carved into the recesses in the wall, one above the other. To the right stood a simple pedestal wash basin and mirror, which, when voice activated, swiveled onto its base to reveal an antiquated chemical toilet bearing the legend, "Now please irradiate your hands." Lister began to wish he was back in his nice cosy luggage locker in Mimas Central. Behind him was a bank of fitted aluminium wardrobes, and 2 steps led down what was laughingly signposted lounge area. The lounge area was about 2 metres square, with a 3-seater reinforced steel settee and a tiny coffee table welded to the floor. Nice, thought Lister. Very homely. The other occupant of the room left very little evidence of his existence. Whatever he did possess was meticulously tidied away. On the wall of his bunk, the lower one, hung a homemade revision timetable in worryingly neat handwriting, and an array of startlingly complex colour codes. Beside it were a number of certificates, neatly framed, and a series of cut-out newspaper headlines, all along the lines of "Arnie does it best," "Arnie comes out on top," and "Arnold, a living legend." Lister scanned the titles of the bookcase, built into a recess above the video screen. Astronavigation and Invisible Number Theory made simple, Conceptual Foundations of Quantum Mechanics made simple, Heisenberg's Uncertainty Principle for Beginners, An Introduction to the Liar Paradox and the Non-Mechanizability of Mathematics, and How to Get More Girls by Hypnosis. He opened his bunkmate's wardrobe and peered in. 20 pairs of identical military blue underpants hang on coat hangers in protective cellophane sheets next to 7 pairs of pale blue pyjamas with dry cleaning tags pinned to the collars. Lister was disturbed to see the pockets of the pyjamas bore an insignia of rank. Brightly polished boots stared unblinkingly in rows on the floor. A pair of monogrammed slippers in the shoe trees stood beside them. Lister closed the wardrobe, struck a match on the no smoking sign, lit up, and sat down on the metal settee. Nice. Very, very nice. Rogerson came back in. "Oh, David, meet your bunkmate." Lister looked up. Behind Rogerson stood a grey-suited technician, tall and rangy, flared nostrils, and wide, slightly manic eyes, and a hyperactive, constantly jiggling right leg that always seemed to want to be somewhere else. Even without his false moustache, there was no mistaking the officer who hired his hopper. "He's also your shift leader, so he's the first guy who'll be showing you the ropes. Lister, this is first technician..." "Arnold Rimmer," said Lister. "We've already met." "No, we haven't," said Rimmer, smiling too much. "You're a technician?" said Lister, surprised. "I thought you said you were an officer." "Shut up," said Rimmer, pumping his hand and smiling even harder. Chapter 10. On the first morning into space, Lister sat in the lecture theatre with the other 11 members of Z-Shift in his brand new technician's uniform, which made him itch in 19 different places while his left arm and his right buttock competed for the title Most Painful Appendage following his 12 inoculation jabs. The rest of the previous morning and the whole of the afternoon had been a long process of multifarious humiliations, hours standing around in backless surgical gowns. Why backless? When did a surgeon ever need to get to your bottom in a hurry? Giving various bodily fluid samples. Peterson had in fact delivered rather more bodily fluid samples than was absolutely necessary, and nobody was pleased. IQ tests, genetic fingerprinting, hand-to-eye coordination work, centrifugal weightlessness simulation. Then, finally, they'd all been marched like a serpent of schoolchildren down to the computer decks, where they each had their personalities recorded for storage in the hologram library. Lister had sat in a suite, a metal skullcap bolted to his head, while his every memory and personality trait had been logged onto a depressingly small computer slug. His entire life, his whole personality. Hey, Pear, sorry. How you doing? What's up? Thanks for coming. His whole personality copied and duplicated on a piece of computer hardware the size of a suppository. Peterson's recording had crashed 3 times, with an error message which read, non-human life form. In the end, they had to drip feed him coffee and subject him to several very cold showers before his brain was functioning sufficiently well enough to be recorded. Oh, good. Well, yeah, that was kind of the point. So yeah, I'm glad it's having its effect. It might not be the best way to retain viewers, but hey, I'm hoping to actually help people nod off a bit, because it's meant to be cozy story time. Yeah, so I'm glad it's working. If, in the highly unlikely circumstance of Peterson achieving the status of indispensable personnel and then dying, he would be retrieved as a hologram with the mater and pater of all hangovers. The lecture theatre hatchway breezed open and Rimmer clicked up the podium in boots so brightly polished you could see infinity in them. The previous evening in the sleeping quarters, no mention had been made of the incident in the brothel. In fact, Rimmer had played the part of a man who had never met Lister before, very credibly indeed. My best cat yowl. Ow! That was terrible. I apologise, but yeah. Nah. Yow! Nah. I'm trying. But unfortunately I don't have Danny John Jules's beautiful tones. As much as I'd love to. I need more W in front. I think the more I try, the worse it's going to get, but wow! Nah, that would just sound like that sounded like, what was his name? The blonde actor guy who says wow a lot. Just very excitedly. Crap, what was it? What was his name? Damn, I've gone off on a tangent. Shit. Yeah, he was in Shanghai Noon. Owen Wilson, that's it, yeah. He's actually my 5-bit thing. But I'm wondering now if you'd be able to hear the alerts if I have the music up too loud. But yeah, Owen Wilson's wow is my 5-bit emote thing. So, yeah. Anyway, yeah. I'm glad that my Lister and Rimmer are fairly good. I've just got to try and work on my cat yowls. Anyway. Where was I? He had declared, not exactly in love with the idea of bunking out with the subordinate, but it was something that they'd just both have to put up with. There's just one rule, he maintained, polishing his boots for a 3rd time. And that rule is KITD. Do you know what KIT stands for? Ken is a transvestite, Lister had offered. Keep it tidy, and if you KIT, then we'll GOJF. He'd left this hanging in the air for effect before translating, get on just famously. Lister spent the rest of the evening trying to take advantage of the fact that he now had a proper bed of sorts for the first time in 6 months. Though, curiously, he'd discovered he couldn't drop off to sleep until he sat up in bed and wrapped both arms around his knees, luggage locker style. Meanwhile, Rimmer sat at his slanting architect's desk and whiled away the time until lights out, reading a book called How to Overcome Your Fear of Public Speaking. Rimmer gripped the podium tightly, the inside of his wrists pointing out towards the new intake, a trick which, his book told him, would make his audience trust him, and began his speech to Z-Shift. "My name," he said, "is Arnold J. Rimmer. You will call me Sir or First Technician. I am your shift leader. This is my very first command, and I don't intend for it to be my last. What I do intend for is for Z-Shift to become the best, the fastest, the tightest, the most efficient routine maintenance, cleaning and sanitation unit this ship, or any other ship in the Space Corps, has ever seen." He paused. Silence. The book said silence could be as effective as speech if used judiciously. Use silence, it urged. Rimmer stood there, being silent. Enough silence, he decided. More speech. "When we do something, we do it fast and we do it right." More silence. Still more silence. No, this was a dumb place to have silence. It just made him look like he'd forgotten what he was saying. "This ship is 3 miles wide, 4 miles deep, and nearly 6 miles long. But," he paused again, "a most excellent and petite silence," he congratulated himself. Very telling. "If anywhere on it, a vending machine so much as runs out of chicken soup, I want a member of Z-Shift to be there within 4 minutes." More silence. The best silence yet. "You used to think your mother was your best friend. Not anymore. From now on, your best friend is this." He held aloft a 3-foot-long metallic tube with a varied twist grip and 7 detachable heads. "It's called a sonic super mop. It washes, it steam cleans, it mops and vacuums, and from now on, it never leaves your side. Wherever you go, the SSM goes with you. You work with it, you eat with it, you sleep with it." The new members of Z-Shift exchanged glances. Rimmer gave them another shot of silence. It had gone well, he thought. Nice, pointy speech. Some good silences. No, some great silences. And he was especially proud of the macho bit at the end about the sonic super mop, which he'd lifted shamelessly from his favourite movie. God, I love this war. Lister stood up and snapped a salute. "Sir, permission to speak, sir?" Sloppy salute, Rimmer thought. He'd have to teach them all his own salute, the one he'd invented, the one he'd drawn diagrams of, sent off to the Space Ministry, in the hope that it would replace the passé, old-fashioned standard one. It was a great salute, and one day it would make him famous. It went thus. From the standard attention pose, the saluter brought his right arm sharply out in front of him, at a perfect angle with his body. He then twirled his wrist in 5 circles to symbolise the 5 arms of the Space Corps, then snapped his arm back, fingers rigid, to form an equilateral triangle with his forehead. He then straightened the elbow so that the arm was pointing sideways from the body, from which position it was snapped smartly back down to his side. There were also variants. The double Rimmer for dress occasions where the salute was performed with both arms simultaneously, and the half Rimmer with only one arm and only 3 circles for emergency situations when there wasn't time to carry out the full Rimmer. "Permission granted," said Rimmer, returning Lister's salute with a 5-loop full Rimmer. "Sir?" "Yes, Lister?" "Is it possible to get a transfer to another shift, sir?" "Why?" "Well, with respect, sir, I think you're mentally unstable." "Sit down." Rimmer shook his head. "There's always one, isn't there? One wag, one clown, one imbecile." "Yes, sir," Lister agreed. "But he's not usually in charge, sir." Laughter. This was a tricky situation. Rebellion, a loss of respect. It had to be stamped on. It had to be crushed. His book on Peyruis was quite clear on that. To crush a minor mutiny, you chose the leader, the toughest, the biggest, the strongest, and you humiliate him. and the rest follow like lambs. Don't look angry. Smile. Real power, true power, is unspoken, understated. Rimmer smiled. Slowly, they stopped laughing. Excellent. Time to strike. Without warning, he wheeled round and pointed. You! On your feet! A man with a face like moon rock hauled his 250-pound frame onto his feet. Rimmer climbed down from the podium and slowly, casually strolled over to face him. He looked up at the small black shark eyes, the bald bullet head, the long matted nostril hair. He was a good 18 inches taller than Rimmer, and Rimmer was tall. What are you chewing? Rimmer said after a suitable amount of silence. Tobacco. Tobacco? A grin. Yeah. Defiance. Rimmer smiled and nodded, looking around the lecture theatre. Well, I hope you brought enough for all of us. The others laughed, on Rimmer's side. Well? Nope. Slightly nonplussed. Nope, sir. Victory. Get rid of it. The big man chewed thoughtfully for a few seconds. Then suddenly, a long plume of brown sputum plopped onto the polished toe cap of Rimmer's left boot. Rimmer looked at his left boot, then slowly raised his head. Some people's respect I've won already. I can see with you it's going to take a little longer. Now get on the floor and give me 50, mister. Said the big man, and a second stream of half-chewed tobacco arrived on Rimmer's right boot. Rimmer rocked back and forth on his heels, nodding his head and still smiling. Right, okay, he said pleasantly. I think that's about everything. Shift dismiss. Slowly, Z-Shift began to meander out of the lecture theatre. Oh, by the way, Rimmer called after the tobacco chewer. As the man turned, Rimmer leapt through the air and, with a kamikaze scream, wrapped his arms and legs around the big man's frame, and they crashed into a row of chairs. As Lister left the theatre, Rimmer was having his head rhythmically beaten against one of the desktops. Fine, Rimmer was saying. There's nothing wrong with your reactions. Just checking. So you like chewing tobacco, eh? Well, that's absolutely fine and dandy. Perhaps you'd like me to run down to supplies and buy you some more. I think I'm going to lose consciousness now. Chapter 11. Everyone agreed it was a splendid funeral, but no one enjoyed it more than the deceased himself. I can't tell you how great it is being dead, he told everyone who would listen. It solved all my problems. Every off-duty member of the 11,169-strong crew had packed into the vast ship canteen. McIntyre sat at the top table, a huge coffin-shaped cake containing his own effigy in marzipan before him, and listened, his ego aglow, while his fellow officers sang his praises. Saunders, much to his own personal delight, had finally been turned off, and although initially there had been some concern about hologrammatically reviving a man who had killed himself, those doubts were allayed when the reasons for McIntyre's suicide were discovered. McIntyre rose to the sound of tumultuous applause and fingered the H emblazoned on his hologrammatic forehead. It's like me! As over 8,000 people stamped on the floor and banged wine glasses with forks and spoons. Well, first, I want to thank the captain for the beautiful eulogy. It was very flattering and deeply moving, and it was well worth all the time I spent writing it. A huge laugh echoed around the canteen. McIntyre smiled happily. On a serious note, I know there's a rumour going round that I committed suicide. I'd like to try and explain why I did it. McIntyre started to talk about his gambling debts he'd incurred during his ship leave in bars on Phoebe, Dione, and Rhea playing Toot. Toot was a banned blood sport involving a fight to the death between two specially bred Venusian fighting snails. The ferocious gastropods with hand-sharpened horns would meet in a 6-foot square pit, and bets would be taken on the eventual victor. Eventual was the word. A single butt from a Venusian fighting snail could take upwards of 3 hours to deliver, and the whole combat often took days. Meanwhile, the baying spectators got drunker and drunker, placing bets of wilder and wilder proportions. You could lose a lot of money playing Toot, and McIntyre had. McIntyre admitted it was a cruel and pointless sport, which said much about man's inhumanity to just about everything to which he could be inhuman. But the buzz from watching two killer snails charging about slowly in the concrete pit, the roaring of the crowd as one snail drew blood, and the other retreated into its shell for hours on end, well, you had to be there to believe it. Before he knew it, McIntyre had debts amounting to almost 5 times his annual salary. In desperation to pay off the Ganymedian mafia who ran the snail pits, he'd taken a massive loan from the Golden Assurance Friendly and Caring Loan Society, which, as it turned out, was also run by the Ganymedian mafia. He didn't know it when he signed, but they charged an annual percentage rate, APR, of 9,800%. The clause in the contract which specified this took the term small print into a whole new dimension. The clause was concealed in a microdot occupying the dot of the I on page 3 of the loan agreement in the phrase, "Welcome, you are now a member of the Golden Assurance family." Startled to discover his first monthly instalment was some 7 times more than the original loan, he gambled what was left and lost that too. McIntyre wrote to the society explaining the situation, and a number of increasingly anxious letters were exchanged during Red Dwarf's tour of the Saturnian satellites. Eventually, McIntyre agreed to meet a representative from the company's head office when the ship docked over Mimas to discuss a repayment plan. Duly, on the first evening in orbit round Mimas, McIntyre donned his dress uniform and went to the coffee lounge of the Mimas Hilton, where he met 3 gentlemen, representatives of the Golden Assurance Friendly and Caring Loan Society, who arrived in Mimas's one and only 5-star hotel, brandishing a pair of industrial cable clippers. There, before the eyes of hotel guests casually taking coffee and scones with clotted cream, McIntyre was force-fed his own nose. He needed little further persuasion before deciding to try a new repayment plan, and finally plumped for the Golden Assurance Friendly and Caring Loan Society's pay by this evening and don't get murdered super discount scheme. Half crazed with fear, he staggered back to his office aboard Red Dwarf, briefly explained his predicament to his rubber plant, and killed himself. The beauty part of this scheme was of course that, as a hologram, he was now safe from reprisals. He could continue his life, dead and untroubled, which is why he was telling everyone who would listen how great it was to be dead, and how it had solved all of his problems. McIntyre finished his speech by thanking everyone for their understanding and kind words, and concluded by paraphrasing Mark Twain. "Rumours of my death," he said, "have been greatly understated." Out of the 8,000 assembled, only 5 people got this joke. And none of them laughed. McIntyre didn't even understand it himself. He'd been told to say it by the ship's metaphysical psychiatrist, who assured him that it would get a big laugh. After the toast, the captain, a short, dumpy American woman who would have the misfortune to be born with the surname Kirk, made a short yet very boring speech welcoming the new intake aboard and outlining the schedule for the Jag to and from Triton, before sitting down and thus signalling the beginning of McIntyre's death disco. The huge sound system vibrated and shook as it pumped out a hip-hop-a-billy reggae number from a band which had been red hot for 2 weeks 5 years previously. 2,000 crew members stood on the dance floor, swaying and sweating, while the rest sat around tables drinking and sweating. Though they'd been aboard less than 2 days, all the lowlifes, ne'er-do-wells and slobs in general had somehow found each other, kindred spirits, and were sitting around in noisy, moronic pockets, having drinking competitions. Equally, all the ambitious career types had somehow been sucked together, and were drinking low-alcohol white wine or slimline mineral water, and talking intensely about work. Except for Phil. For some reason, Phil Burrows had accidentally gotten himself attached to Lister's group. Phil was a serious-minded academy undergrad on a 2-year attachment. It would be a full 24 hours before he realised he had joined the wrong group, and had absolutely nothing in common with any of the people with whom he was presently sharing his evening. In the meantime, Peterson was pouring a pint of beer into his jacket pocket. "That's my beer! What the hell are you doing?" screamed Phil. "It's just my way," Peterson beamed charmingly, "of saying it's your round, pal." Phil got up and staggered to the bar. Although there were only 5 of them at the table, Lister, Peterson, Chen, Selby and himself, he'd been told to order 25 pints of beer. For some reason he couldn't understand. Every round consisted of 4 pints each. "Saves on shoe leather," Peterson had pointed out. It didn't seem to matter whether or not you wanted them either. Each round Phil had requested a low-alcohol white wine, and each round he'd been delivered 4 pints of foaming Japanese lager. He knew for a fact Chen and Peterson were filching at least 2 of his 4 pints, but that was absolutely fine with him. His top limit was 3 pints a night, and he'd had 7 already. 3 identical barmen asked for his order. He asked for 20 pints, laid his head in a beery pool on the bar, and promptly fell asleep. Back at the table, Lister finished his story about how he'd been shanghaied aboard. He'd embellished it only slightly. In his version, for instance, both the shore patrol women had seduced him in a photo UQuick booth, and that's why he had that slightly shocked expression on his passport photograph. Peterson took his turn. He'd arrived on Mimas in a nuclear waste dump ship called Pax Vert, which had ejected its putrid load on the Saturnian moon of Tethys, also there, and was now returning to Earth. He was trying to work his passage across the solar system to Triton, where he'd bought a house. As he explained, since Triton was on the very edge of the solar system, being over 2.5 billion miles away from Earth, house prices there were really reasonable. For just $2,000 pounds, Peterson had bought a 25-bedroom home dome with 12 ensuite bathrooms and a 0G squash court. "At first, I thought there was something wrong with it," he said, showing Lister a sketch he'd been sent by the estate agent. "But look, it's beautiful." "They didn't send you a photograph?" said Lister, his eyes narrowing. "No, you can't photograph in a methane atmosphere." "You're telling me they haven't installed an oxygen atmosphere yet?" "No, I'll have to wander around my house in a spacesuit, but that's why it's so cheap." He quickly downed 2 pints. "You ought to move there. There's a plot of about 2,000 miles right next door to me. I'm telling you, it's a great investment. 10-12 years they have plans to install oxygen. Can you imagine what will happen to the house prices once the atmosphere's breathable? They'll rocket, baby." Lister looked at him. Was he serious? Yes, he was. "No, listen," Peterson continued. "Do you know Triton is the only moon in the whole solar system which rotates in the opposite direction of the planet it's orbiting?" Peterson demonstrated the scientific principle by rotating his head and swooshing his beer glass around it the other way. Thin, fizzy lager cascaded onto the already sodden table. "Maybe," said Lister, who was seriously beginning to wonder whether Peterson was brain damaged. "But that's no reason to buy a house there." "True," agreed Peterson. "But if ever you have guests, it's a nice talking point." The music changed. A Johnny Cologne number, "Press Your Lumps Against Mine." It was smooch time. There was a loud scraping of chairs as people stood up and guided their partners to the already packed dance floor. A huge, multi-limbed beast rippled, ebbing and flowing, contracting and expanding to the gentle sway of the music. Lister suddenly found himself alone at the table, the others lost in the undulating, pulsating mass of smooching bodies. He squinted drunkenly around the vast disco. So many people. People dancing, people touching, people laughing, people talking, people kissing. So many people. In just over 7 months, every one of them would be dead. Chapter 12. 5 months later, Lister stared out of the sleeping quarters viewpoint window and saw nothing. Just a very few, very distant stars, and an awful lot of black. It was pretty much the same view he'd had for the past 21 weeks. At first he found it awe-inspiring. Then slowly that had given way to just plain dull, then very dull, then deeply dull. And now it was something below deeply dull, and even below deeply hideously dull. A word for which had yet to be devised. It was, he thought, even more mind-numbingly, deeply hideously dull than an all-nighter at the Scala, watching a 12-hour season of back-to-back Peter Greenway movies. If you went to the British Library and changed every word in every single book to the word dull, and then read out all the books in a boring monotone, you would come pretty close to describing Lister's life on board the Red Dwarf. He looked at his watch. 7:50 ship time. He was waiting for Peterson to show up, and they were going to go down to the Copacabana Hawaiian cocktail bar to spend the evening exactly in the same way they'd spent 133 of the last 147 evenings, drinking hugely elaborate San Francisco earthquakes, plastic coconuts with Chen and Selby, and failing to meet any interesting women. Or, more to the point, any interesting women who were interested in them. Dull and gruesomely monotonous as his social life was, Lister knew for a fact it was at least 474 times more interesting than his working life on Z-Shift under Rimmer. Rimmer was sitting at his slanting architect's desk, under the pink glow of his study lamp, with a tray of watercolours, making out a revision timetable in preparation for his astronavigation exam. In all, he'd taken the exam 11 times. 9 times he got an F for fail, and on 2 occasions he got an X for unclassified. I got that in math. Like, I'm not even joking, I got an X in math. I'm not proud of that, but it's one of my few claims to fame. But he persevered, just like me. Each night he persevered, under the pink glow. Each night he nibbled away at his skyscraper-high stack of files which stored his loose-leaf revision notes. He nibbled away, trying to digest little morsels of knowledge. Little morsels that stuck in his gullet and wouldn't go down. It was like trying to eat wads of cotton wool. But he persevered. Rimmer wanted to become an officer. He ached for it. He yearned for it. It wasn't the most important thing in his life. It was his life. Given the opportunity, he would gladly have had his eyes scooped out if it meant he could become an officer. He would happily have inserted 2 red-hot needles simultaneously through both his ears so that they met in the middle of his brain and tap-danced the title song from 42nd Street barefoot on a bed of molten lava while giving oral sex to a male orangutan with dubious personal hygiene, if only it meant attaining that single elusive golden bar of an astronavigation officer, 4th class. But he had to do something much more demanding, much more impossible, and much more unpleasant. He had to pass the astronavigation exam. Born on Io, one of Jupiter's moons 31 years earlier, he was the youngest of 4 brothers. Frank was a gnat's swing away from becoming the youngest captain in the Space Corps. John was the youngest captain in the Space Corps. Howard had graduated 3rd in his class at the Academy, and was now a test pilot for the new generation of demi-lightspeed zippers at Houston, Earth. "My boys," his mother would say, "my clever, clever boys. Johnny the captain, Frankie the first officer, Howie the test pilot, and Arnold the chicken soup machine cleaner. If you could sue sperm, I'd sue the sperm that made you." "I'll do it, mother. One day I will become an officer." "And on that day," his mother would say, "Satan will be going to work in a snowplow." If Rimmer hadn't been such a dedicated anal retentive, he would have realised the simple truth. He wasn't cut out for space. He wasn't cut out for it. He would have realised he wasn't the slightest bit interested in astronavigation, or quantum mechanics, or any of the things he needed to be interested in to pass the exams and become an officer. 3 times he'd failed the entrance exam to the Academy, and so one night after reading the life story of Horatio Nelson, he'd signed up with a merchant vessel as a lowly 3rd technician, with the object of quickly working his way through the ranks and sitting the astronavigation exam independently, and thereby earning his commission, the glimmering gold bar of officerhood. That had been 6 years ago. 6 long years on Red Dwarf, during which he'd leapt from being a lowly 3rd technician to being a lowly 1st technician. In the meantime, his brothers went forever onward up the ziggurat of command. Their success filled him with such bitterness, such bile, that even a Christmas card from one of them, just the reminder that they were alive and successful, would reduce him to tears of jealousy. And now he sat there under the pink glow of his student's table lamp. Reduces eye strain, promotes concentration, aids retention, was the lamp's manufacturer's proud boast. Preparing to sit the astronavigation exam for the 13th time. He found the process of revising so gruelly unpleasant, so galling, so noxious, that like most people faced with tasks they find hateful, he devised more and more elaborate ways of not doing it in a doing it kind of way. In fact, it was now possible for Rimmer to revise solidly for 3 months and not learn anything at all. The first week of study he would always devote to the construction of a revision timetable. At school, Rimmer was always his happiest colouring in geography maps. Under his loving hand, the ice fields of Europa would be shaded a delicate blue, the subterranean silica deposits of Ganymede would be rendered centimetre by painstaking centimetre a bright and powerful yellow, and the regions of frozen methane on Pluto slowly became a luscious, inviting green. Up until the age of 13, he was constantly head of the class in geography. After this point, it became necessary to know and understand the subject, and Rimmer's marks plunged to the murky depths of F for fail. He brought his love of cartography to the making of revision timetables. Weeks of patient effort would be spent planning, designing, and creating a revision schedule which, when finished, were minor works of art. Every hour of every day was subdivided into different study periods, each labelled in his lovely, tiny copperplate hand, then painted over in watercolours a different colour for each subject, the colours gradually becoming bolder and more urgent shades as the exam time approached. The effect was as if a myriad of tiny rainbows had splintered and sprinkled across the poster-sized sheet of cream-woven card. The only problem was this. Because the timetables often took 7 or 8 weeks, and sometimes more, to complete, by the time Rimmer had finished them, the exam was almost on him. He'd then have to cram 3 months of astronavigation revision into a single week. Gripped by an almost deranging panic, he then decided to sacrifice the first 2 days of that final week to the making of another timetable. This time for someone who had to pack 3 months of revision into 5 days. Because 5 days now had to accommodate 3 months' work, the first thing that had to go was sleep. To prepare for an unrelenting 24 hours a day, sleep-free schedule, Rimmer would spend the whole of the first evening day in bed to be extra ultra-fresh, so that he would be able to squeeze 3 whole months of revision into 4 short days. Within an hour of getting up the next morning, he would feel inexplicably exhausted and start early on his supply of Go Double Plus caffeine tablets. By lunchtime he'd overdose and have to make the journey down to the ship's medical unit for a sedative to help him calm down. The sedative usually sent him off to sleep, and he'd wake up the following morning with only 3 days left, and an anxiety that was so crippling he could scarcely move. A month of revision to be crammed into each day. At this point he would start smoking. A lifelong non-smoker, he'd become a 40-a-day man. He'd spend the whole day pacing up and down his room, smoking 3 or 4 cigarettes at a time, stopping occasionally to stare at the titles in the bookcase, not knowing which one to read first, and popping twice the recommended dosage of dog-worming tablets, which he erroneously believed to contain amphetamine. Realising he was getting nowhere, he tried to rid his soul-bending tension by treating himself to an evening in one of the Red Dwarf's quieter bars. There he would sit in the plastic oak-beamed Happy Astro pub, nursing a small beer, grimly trying to be light-hearted and totally relaxed. 2 small beers and 3 hours of stomach-knotting relaxation later, he would go back to his bunk and spend half the night awake, praying to a god he didn't believe in for a miracle that couldn't happen. 2 days to go, and ravaged by the combination of anxiety, nicotine, caffeine tablets, alcohol he wasn't used to, dog-worming pills, and overall exhaustion, he would sleep in till mid-afternoon. After a long scream, he would rationalise that the day was a total write-off, and the rest of the afternoon would be spent shopping for the 3 best alarm clocks money could buy. This would often take 5 or 6 hours, and he would arrive back at his sleeping quarters exhausted, but knowing he was fully prepared for the final day's revision before his exam. Waking at 4:30 in the morning, after exercising, showering and breakfasting, he would sit down to prepare a final revision timetable, which would condense 3 months of revision into 12 short hours. This done, he would give up and go back to bed. Maybe he didn't know a single thing about astronavigation, but at least he'd be fresh for the exam the next day. Which is why Rimmer failed exams. Which is why he'd received 9 Fs for fail and 2 Xs for unclassified. The first X he'd achieved when he'd actually managed to get hold of some real amphetamines, gone into spasm and collapsed 2 minutes into the exam, and the second when anxiety got so much the better of him, his subconscious forced him to deny his own existence, and he had written "I am a fish" 500 times on every single answer sheet. He'd even gone out for extra paper. What was more shocking than anything was that he thought he'd done quite well. Well, this time it was going to be different, he thought, as he sat carefully colouring in all the quantum mechanics revision periods in diagonal lines of Prussian blue on a yellow ochre background, while Lister stared out of the viewport window. Peterson clumped noisily into the room and did his sorry, I don't recognise this word. Trational parody of the full double Rimmer salute, which ended with him slapping his face several times and throwing himself onto the floor. The first time Lister had seen it, it was funny. This was the 252nd time, and it was beginning to lose its appeal. Lister and Peterson then went down to the Copacabana Hawaiian cocktail bar for the 134th time. Only this time, Lister did something incredibly stupid. He fell in love. Hopelessly and helplessly in love. Chapter 13. Third Console Officer Christine Kochanski had a face. That was the first thing Lister noticed about her. It wasn't a beautiful face, but it was a nice face. It wasn't a face that could launch 1,000 ships. Maybe 2 ships and a small yacht. That was when she smiled. That was until she smiled. When she smiled, her eyes lit up like a pinball machine when you win a bonus game, and she smiled a lot. Lister could perhaps have survived the smile, but it was when he found the smile was attached to a sense of humour that he became irretrievably lost. They were both standing at the bar, queuing to get a drink, and Lister was looking at her in a not looking at her kind of way, in the bar mirror, in the reflection, in his beer glass over his shoulder, pretending to look at Peterson, at the ceiling above his head, and occasionally, because it was permitted, directly at her. His heart sank when a tanned, white uniform officer who obviously knew her came up and touched her shoulder. Touched her on the shoulder, just like she was some kind of ordinary person. It really made Lister mad. The tanned, white uniformed officer noticed a book sticking out of her black jacket pocket. Lister had noticed it too. It was called Learn Japanese by Dr. Peyruis. Learn Japanese? The officer snorted. Talk about pretentious. What she said next tipped Lister over the edge. Pretentious? She placed her palm on her chest. Watashi? Weeb. Lister didn't know any Japanese, but he guessed, rightly, that it was an adaptation of the pretentious... He guessed rightly that it was an adaptation of the pretentious moi joke. The officer just looked at her blankly. She got her drinks and went back to her seat, while Lister was still trying to think of something to say which could start a conversation. For the next hour, Peterson droned on about the supply station of the Uranian moon Miranda, where Red Dwarf was due to stop off for supplies in 7 weeks. It was to be their only shore leave between Saturn and Triton, and Peterson was telling him what a great time they were going to have. But Lister wasn't listening. He was looking across the crowded cocktail bar, trying to calculate the amount of drink left in the glasses of the girl with the pinball smile and her female companion, so that he could be at the bar just as she arrived and casually offer to buy her a drink. Who was he kidding? How do you casually offer to buy someone a drink without making it sound like, I want you to have my babies? If he hadn't been crazy about her, it wouldn't have been a problem. Lister never had any trouble asking women for a date, provided he wasn't too keen on them. When he was, which didn't happen often, He had all the charm, wit and self-possession of an Alaskan dog after a head swap operation. She got up to go to the bar. Lister got up too. They exchanged smiles, ordered drinks and then went back to their separate tables. Damn, Smeg. Blew it. She got up again. My round, said Peterson, rising. Lister thrust him back into his chair and went to the bar. They exchanged smiles and highs this time, ordered their drinks and went back to their separate tables. Damn, Smeg. Blew it again. She'd hardly sat down before she was getting up again. The two girls' glasses were full. She's going for peanuts, thought Lister. You want some peanuts? He asked You want some peanuts? He asked Peterson. No thanks. I'll go and get some. They stood at the bar again. They exchanged smiles again. Then she introduced herself and asked him out for a date. And so it began. Lister became a walking cliché. His senses were heightened, so even in the foul, recycled air of the ship, tasted crisp and spring-like. He went off his food. He stopped drinking. Pop lyrics started to mean something to him. Magically, he became better looking. He'd heard that this happened, but he'd never really believed it. He got out of bed before his alarm clock went off. Unheard of. He started to marvel at the view out of the viewport window. And his face acquired 3 new expressions. 3 expressions which he'd stolen from her. 3 expressions which, on her, he'd found adorable. He wasn't aware of even copying them, and he certainly wasn't aware of how stupid he looked when he pulled them. And even if he had been aware, he wouldn't have cared, because 3rd Console Officer Christine Kachansky, aka Babes, aka Ange, short for Angel, aka Chrissy, aka KK, aka Sweet Pea, and a host of others too nauseating to recount, was madly, electrically in love with him. Lister's all-time favourite movie was Frank Capra's It's a Wonderful Life, and just to make things totally perfect, it happened to be Kachansky's too. They sat in bed. Kachansky's bunkmate Barbara had been chased away to the ship's cinema yet again, eating hot dogs doused in mustard and watching, for the 3rd consecutive night, It's a Wonderful Life on the sleeping quarters vidscreen. Suddenly, in the middle of the scene where Jimmy Stewart's father dies, Lister found himself for the first time in his life talking about his own father's death. It wasn't, of course, his real father, but he was only 6 at the time and he didn't know that he'd been adopted. It had been a gloriously hot day in midsummer, and the 6-year-old Lister was given toys and presents by everyone. It was better than Christmas. He remembered wishing at the time that a few more people would die, so he'd complete his Lego set. She held his hand and listened. My grandmother tried to explain. She said he'd gone away and he wasn't coming back. So I wanted to know where, and she told me he was very happy. And he'd gone to the same place as my goldfish. Lister toyed absently with his plaited locks. Plaited locks. I thought they'd flushed him down the bog. I used to stand with my head down the loo and talk to him. I thought it was just round the U-bend. In the end, they had to take me to a child psychologist because they found me with my head down the pan reading the football scores. This had never struck Lister as being funny, but when Kachansky started roaring with laughter, he started laughing, too. It was like a geyser going off. Something was exercised. And as they lay in the crumb-laden sheets, wrapped in each other's arms, giggling like idiots, and even though they'd only been dating for 3.5 short weeks, Lister knew more certainly than he'd ever known anything in his life, that they'd be together forever. Or will they? Chapter 14. 7 months out into space, while Rimmer sat at his slanting architect's desk under the pink glow of his study lamp, Lister stared out at the sleeping quarters viewport window, longing to be bored again. He'd been not going out with Kachansky now for 3 weeks. The whole affair, the glorious forever he'd imagined, had lasted just over a month. Then, one evening in her sleeping quarters, as Lister arrived to take her to a movie, she told him she wanted to break it off. He laughed. He thought it was a joke, but it wasn't. She'd been seeing Tom, or was it Tim? It may have been Tony. For almost 2 years. Tom, or Tim, it may have been Tony, had left her for a fling with some brunette in catering. and Lister had been a rebound thing. She hadn't realised it at first, but when Tom, Tim, Tony or Terry, or whatever the smeg he was called, had turned up at her door, having dumped the brunette in catering, she'd gone scurrying back. There were tears, there were apologies, and pathetic cliched platitudes. They could still be friends. If he met Trevor, he'd really like him. She wished that she were two people so she could love both of them, ad nausea. She'd returned the blue jumper he'd left. She'd returned his DAT tapes and offered to give him back the necklace he'd bought her, which of course he'd declined. And that was that. Except it wasn't, because now she was everywhere. Everything he did without her. Everywhere he went without her. When he went shopping, he didn't go shopping. He went shopping without Kochanski. When he went to the bar, he didn't go to the bar. He went to the bar without Kochanski. She'd infected every part of his life. His mental map of the ship now judged all distances in relation to her sleeping quarters, or the drive room, or where she worked. He wasn't walking on such and such a corridor. He was walking on such and such a corridor, which was N floors above or N floors below where she was at that precise moment. So as he lay on his bunk, staring out the viewport window, longing for the anaesthetic of the stupefying monotony which he used to feel only 2 short months earlier. His only relief from the Kochanski blues had been 3 days planet leave on the alcohol-dry Uranian moon, Miranda, when Red Dwarf had docked for supplies. 3 days drinking cola and playing video games with Peterson. Peterson, who'd got drunk every single night of his life since he was 12, was so thrilled with the benefits of being sober, he'd gone teetotal overnight. So their excursions down to the Copacabana were a thing of the past, denying Lister his one last refuge. He sighed like a senile dog and looked down at Rimmer, hard at work. "Do you fancy going for a drink?" he asked, knowing the answer would be no before he'd even finished saying the word do. "No," said Rimmer without looking up. "That's a surprise." "As it happens, I am going out tonight, just not with you. What about your revision?" Rimmer had decided to change. His latest 3-month revision timetable had been constructed within 2 hours, and 4 hours a day, come what may, he read his course books, made notes, and revised in a sensible way. And revising in a sensible way obviously meant an adequate provision for leisure time. "Well, where are you going then?" "Out." "Where?" Rimmer ignored him. He was going to spend the evening not getting any older. He was going to spend it in a stasis booth. Red Dwarf, like most of the older ships, was equipped with stasis booths for interstellar travel. 100 years earlier, travelling to other star systems had been considered economically and philosophically interesting, but not anymore. To travel the vast distances involved, even with craft which could achieve demi-light speed, took decades. Necessity being the mother of invention, a stasis booth was duly invented. Basically, it was a foolproof form of suspended animation, but instead of freezing the body cryogenically and having all of the attendant revival problems, the stasis booth simply froze time. Once activated, the booth created a static field of time. In the same way X-rays can't penetrate lead, time couldn't penetrate a stasis field. An object caught within the field became a non-event mass with a quantum probability of 0. In other words, the object remained in exactly the same state at exactly the same age until it was released. Most of the important groundwork for time freezing and stasis theory had been done by Einstein in the 1950s. Unfortunately, just as he was on the verge of a breakthrough, he started dating Marilyn Monroe and basically lost interest in the project. Even after their short affair was over, he found it difficult to concentrate on quantum theory, and spent much of the rest of his life taking cold showers. His notes on the theory later were discovered and developed, and the stasis booth was born. For a period, ships full of Astros in stasis booths were hurled out of our solar system, and interstellar travel enjoyed its golden age. Big hope, of course, was that they'd contact intelligent life. They didn't. Not even a moderately intelligent plant. Not even a stupid plant. Nothing. And it was surmised correctly, although it wasn't confirmed for a further 2,000 years, that mankind was completely and totally and inexplicably alone. In all the universe. In all of the universe, the planet Earth was the only planet with any life forms. That's all there was. Interstellar travel was abandoned as a total waste of time, and the returning Stellarnauts tried to reintegrate into society and cope with the fact that many of them were now 50 years younger than their own children. This led to curious generation gap problems, of which the greeting cards industry took full advantage. Rimmer had a keycard to one of Red Dwarf's stasis booths, which he used whenever he could. While morons like Lister and Peterson were urinating their lives down the gutter in the Copacabana Hawaiian cocktail bar, he was in a stasis booth, not existing, not getting any older. It made great good sense to Rimmer. Take tonight. There was nothing he particularly wanted to do. He'd achieved all the aims on his daily goal list, and under normal circumstances, he'd just lounge around, doing not very much, and eventually go to bed. As it was, when they took to their bunks that night, Rimmer would be 3 hours less older than Lister. Because he wouldn't have lived those 3 hours. He'd have saved them. Saved them for when he really needed them. True, technically, tonight, he wouldn't be living. But he didn't particularly want to live tonight. He wasn't in the mood. It was just like a bank, only instead of saving up money, he was saving up time. He'd been doing it on and off for about 5 years, and in this way he used up most of his free leisure time. Most Sundays were spent boothing, and then usually 3 evenings a week for 3 hours or so, and obviously if there were any bank holidays he'd take full advantage of the facility not to exist, and pinch back a few hours from Father Time. In just 5 years he'd saved 369 full days, over a full Earth year. In 5 years he'd only lived for 4, although his birth certificate said he was 31. Technically, he was still only 30. Occasionally, Rimmer reflected that his boothing could possibly be the reason why he didn't have any friends. But as he pointed out to himself, if having friends meant having to hang around and get older with them, then he wasn't sure he wanted any, especially since the perks were so astonishing. He often looked in the full-length mirror when Lister wasn't there and reflected that, although he was 31, he still had the body of a 30-year-old. If he could maintain this routine, by the time his birth certificate said he was 90, he'd actually only be a very sprightly 78-year-old. Pretty smegging amazing, huh? Lister slumped off to try and persuade Peterson to go for a drink. Rimmer watched him go, then showered and changed, treated himself to a little aftershave, and went to spend the very last evening of his life not existing. Chapter 15. On the very last morning of his life, Rimmer strode into the lecture theatre to give Z-Shift their work schedule for the day. Should probably say Z-Shift, shouldn't I? Oh well. Okay, men, he said as always. Listen up. As always, the whole of Z-Shift inclined their heads to one side and pointed their ears at the ceiling. But as always, Rimmer missed this as he turned his back to pull down the blackboard he'd prepared the day before. As always, his schedule wasn't there. What was there was a crudely drawn cartoon of a man making love to a kangaroo, wearing hugely exaggerated footwear covered in brown spit, and underneath, in the same crude hand, "Old Tobacco Boots Goes Down Under." Nobody laughed. Rimmer looked around at the sea of blank faces. He'd long since given up referring to the blackboard insults. Okay, he said, consulting his notes. Today's schedule. Turner Wilkinson. We've had a number of reports that machine 15455 is dispensing blackcurrant juice instead of chicken soup. While you're down there, Corridor 14, Alpha 12 needs new crunchy bars. Ooh. Hey, Azvar! Thanks for the raid. How you doing? Thank you, Coro. Thank you, Stony. Oh yeah, hi everyone. How you all doing? How did your raid go? I always say that. Always say it every time. How did your stream go, Zvar? And thank you again. Thank you. Yeah. Hope everyone's doing well. Yeah. Sorry, we're just in the middle of reading, so there's not really a lot going on aside from words. Yeah. So I hope everyone's doing well. Yeah, I'm good, thank you. Just enjoying the book. Same as usual. And did you enjoy Zvar's stream? What happened? Well, if you want to be read to sleep, I'm happy to do it. So, just got up to chapter 15. So, Well, chapter 15 of part 1 anyway. Ooh. Posture check, thank you, Zvar. I have been slumping a bit. Oh, she got angry. Oh, so did nobody clip it? I have to go back and watch the VOD and then clip that. Oh, yeah, well, Pyre, to be fair, is pretty, it looked frustrating watching you play. Just because it doesn't look as fun as Bastion or Transistor or... They had a new one out recently, haven't they? Can't remember the name of it. Oh well. But yeah, so don't blame you, because it looked very annoying. Hades, that was it, yeah, duh. Which is really good, comparatively. Angry Z awakens things in you. It's worrying. Yeah, it's really good. I think it's got to be on sale again at some point soon, hasn't it? So, I can always get it for you. So, I've not completed it myself yet. I'm like, I probably shouldn't spoil if Zvar's not played it. But it's definitely past the second boss, I think. Yeah, it's definitely past the second boss. Might be past the third. But anyway. Yeah, so I hope everyone's prepared for reading time, because that's what's happening. And yeah, thank you again for the raid, Zvar, and welcome everyone. I'm Jack, Panda, obviously. And I do reading streams and I do general gaming streams. On Mondays and Fridays I'm currently playing Psychonauts and Psychonauts 2. And Sunday I'll be doing Resident Evil 4 for the first time, technically. So I'm looking forward to that. And then Wednesdays I do other random things. And yeah, so that's it. I'll get back to reading now. Nice to have you all here. Right. I'll start from the beginning of chapter 15. On the very last morning of his life, Rimmer strode into the lecture theatre to give Z-Shift their work schedule for the day. "Okay, men," he said as always. "Listen up." As always, the whole of Z-Shift inclined their heads to one side and pointed their ears at the ceiling. But, as always, Rimmer missed this as he turned his back to pull down the blackboard he'd prepared the day before. As always, his schedule wasn't there. What was there was a crudely drawn cartoon of a man making love to a kangaroo, wearing hugely exaggerated footwear covered in brown spit, and underneath, in the same crude hand, old tobacco boots goes down under. Nobody laughed. Rimmer looked round at the sea of blank faces. He'd long since given up referring to the blackboard insults. "Okay," he said, consulting his notes. "Today's schedule. Turner, Wilkinson. We've had a number of reports that machine 15455 is dispensing blackcurrant juice instead of chicken soup. While you're down there, Corridor 14, Alpha 12 needs new crunchy bars. Thereafter, I want you to go down to the reference library and hygienize all the headsets in the language lab. Saxon and Burroughs, continue painting the engineer's mess. And I want that finished today. McCulloch, Schmidt, Palmer, as yesterday. Bird, Dooley, Pixon, laundrettes on East Alpha 555 report no less than 24 dryers out of commission. I want them up and drying by nightfall. Also, there's an unconfirmed rumour that the cigar machine in the officers' club is nearly empty. Now, it may be nothing, but just in case, for pity's sake, stay by a phone." A paper dart whistled past his head. "Okay, roll out. Lister, you're with me today." The men began to shuffle out. "Why me?" Lister moaned. "Because it's your turn." As always, just before the first man reached the door, Rimmer called out his team chant, which he hoped would catch on. "Hey, and remember, we are tough and we are mean. Rimmer's Z-Shift gets things clean." Z-Shift shuffled out silently. Two of the three worst things that ever happened to Rimmer on that day. The worst thing that ever happened was, of course, his death. But that was a clear 12 hours away. The second worst thing that ever happened had happened 13 months earlier, and it was so horrible his subconscious had created a new sub-department to hide it from his waking thoughts. It involved a bowl of soup. The third worst thing that had ever happened to Rimmer shortly after 10 o'clock, as he and Lister made their way towards Corridor 1, Gamma 755 to check, just to put Rimmer's mind at ease, that there was enough shower gel in the women's washroom. At first, it was Lister who had a horrible thing happen to him as he pushed his squeaky four-wheel hygiene truck along the steel mesh floor. First Technician Petrovich rounded the corner. Rimmer didn't like Petrovich. Petrovich, 3 years his junior, was his equal in rank and leader of A shift. The best shift. A shift got all the plum jobs, the serious, technical work, repairing porous circuits, and if that wasn't bad enough, Petrovich had taken and passed the astronavigation exam the exact same time that Rimmer had made his claims to fishhood, and was now merely waiting for his orders to be processed before he got his gold bar and took up the rank of Astronavigation Officer, 4th class. Also, he was good-looking, popular, charming and amiable. All in all, as far as Rimmer could see, there wasn't a single thing to like about Petrovich. There had been a wild rumour some months back that Petrovich was a drug dealer, and Rimmer did whatever he could to spread it. He didn't know whether it was true, but God, he hoped it was. Whatever he was feeling low, he entertained himself with visions of Petrovich having his badges of rank stripped off his uniform and being led away in manacles. Still, there was no evidence that it was true, so all Rimmer could do was keep spreading those malicious rumours and hoping. "What the smeg is wrong with your bleepers? I've been trying to get hold of you for an hour," said Petrovich. "Lister, the captain wants to see you." Rimmer looked dumbfounded. Why should the captain want to see Lister? In the ordinary course of things, Lister, being a lowly 3rd technician, should go the whole trip without ever meeting the captain. Unless, thought Rimmer, brightening, he's in very, very deep smegola indeed. And by the slightly sick look of Lister's smile, Rimmer confidently surmised the very same thought had occurred to him. Why does he want to see me? "I think you know why," said Petrovich, his usual geniality completely absent. Lister dragged himself off towards the express lift. "Oh dear," said Rimmer breezily. "Oh dear, oh dear, oh dear." He tutted and shook his head. "Dearie me, dearie, dearie, dearie me." Petrovich didn't smile. He made to follow Lister, but then snapped and turned. "What are you doing with Lister anyway? It's 10:05. "So?" said Rimmer. "I thought you were taking the astronavigation exam." "That's November the 27th, you square-jawed chump," said Rimmer with naked contempt. "No, it's October the 27th. "I think, Petrovich, I know when my own exam is, thank you so very, very much." "My bunkmate is taking it today." "Hollerbuck?" "Yeah, he went up at 10. Rimmer's smile remained exactly where it was, while the rest of his face sagged like a bloodhound's. He looked at his watch. 7 minutes past 10. He tapped it a couple of times and walked off without saying anything. Rimmer arrived, breathless, back at the sleeping quarters. He skidded to a halt in front of his timetable. His eyes scanned the chart for an error. He couldn't find one. He couldn't find one for a whole 2 minutes. Then he froze. In his haste not to dwell on the construction of the chart, somehow he'd included 2 Septembers. August, September, September, October, November, ran the new Rimmerian calendar. "How could I have included September twice and not noticed?" thought Rimmer, sucking on his fist. "This is exactly what happens when you spend most of your social life not existing." He looked at his watch. 10:35. He'd missed 35 minutes of a 3-hour exam. A strange calmness overtook him. Well, he could still get to the exam by, say, 10:45. If he kept his answers short and pertinent, it was still more than possible to pass. So far, so good. What would be slightly trickier was cramming a whole month's revision into minus 35 minutes. 35 minutes was hard enough, but minus 35 minutes, well, you'd have to be Doctor Who. As always, at crisis times in his life, Rimmer asked himself the question, what would Napoleon do? Something French, he thought, probably munch on a croissant, and decide to invade Russia. Not really relevant, he decided, in this particular scenario. What then? What then? The seconds ticked away. Then it came to him. He knew exactly what he must do. Cheat. Rimmer took out a black felt-tip pen, stripped off his shirt and trousers, and began work. He had, he estimated, 20 minutes to copy as much of his textbooks onto his body as humanly possible. Chapter 16. Lister had never been up to the drive room before. It was enormous. Hundreds of people scurried along the network of gantries stretching above him. Banks of programmers in white officers' uniforms clacked away at computer keyboards in front of multicoloured flashing screens arranged in a series of horseshoe shapes around the massive chamber. Scutters, the small service droids with three-fingered clawed heads, joined to their motorised bases by triple-jointed necks, whizzed between the various computer terminals transporting sheets of data. Occasionally, a voice could be heard above the unrelenting jabber of hundreds of people talking at once. Stop start A31! Stop start A31! Thank you! At last! Stop start A34! Is anybody listening to me? Lister followed Petrovich as he zigzagged through a maze of towering columns of identical hard disk drives, and people pushed past them, desperate to get back to wherever they had to get back to. Up above them, Holly's bald-headed digitized face dominated the whole of the ceiling, patiently answering questions and solving quandaries, while dispensing relevant data updates from other areas of the ship. Through the computer hardware, Lister caught sight of Kachansky, expertly clicking away at a computer keyboard, happily going on about her business, just as if nothing had happened. Lister didn't exactly expect her to be sobbing guiltily onto her keyboard, but smiling? Actively smiling? It was obscene. Lister remembered reading in one of Rimmer's strange science mags that an Earth biochemist claimed he'd isolated the virus which caused love. According to him, it was an infectious germ that was particularly virulent for the first few weeks, but then, gradually, the body recovered. Looking at Kachansky merrily tippy-tapping away, Lister was inclined to believe the biochemist had a point. She'd shrugged him off like a bout of dysentery. She'd recovered from him like it was a dose of flu. She was fine and dandy, back to normal. They climbed the gantry steps to the admin level, where glass-fronted officers wound round the entire chamber, like the private boxes which skirted the London Jets 0G football stadium. 5 minutes later, they arrived outside the captain's office. Petrovich knocked and they went in. "Lister, sir," said Petrovich, and left. The office looked like it had been newly burgled and freshly bombed. The captain was mumbling into a phone buried beneath gigantic reams of computer printout, surrounded by open ledgers and piles of memoranda. Lister shifted uncomfortably and waited for her to finish her call. "Well, you see, he does exactly that," finished the captain, and before the phone had even hit its holder, and without looking up, she said, "Where's the cat?" "What?" said Lister. "Where's the cat?" repeated the captain. "What cat?" "I'm going to ask you one last time," she said, finally looking up. "Where is the cat?" "Let me get this straight," said Lister. "You think I know something about a cat, right?" "Don't be smart." The captain was actually smiling with anger. "Where is it?" "I don't know what you're talking about." "Lister, not only are you so stupid that you bring an unquarantined animal aboard, not only that," she paused, "you have your photograph taken with the cat and send it to be processed in the developing lab. So let's make this the last chorus. Where's the cat?" "What cat?" "This one!" she shouted, pushing a photograph into Lister's face. "This goddamn cat!" Lister looked at the photograph of himself sitting in what was unmistakably his sleeping quarters, holding what was unmistakably a small black cat. "Oh, that cat? Where'd you get it? Mimas? Miranda? When we stopped for supplies? Don't you realise it could be carrying anything? Anything! What were you thinking of?" "I just felt sorry for her. She was wandering the streets. Her fur was all hanging off." Her fur was all hanging off? Oh, this gets better and better. 2 of the captain's phones were ringing, but she didn't answer them. And she had this limp, and she'd walk a few steps and then let out this scream, and then a few more steps and scream again. Well, now I'm screaming, Lister. I want that cat, and I want it now. Do you think we have quarantine regulations just for the hell of it? Just to make life a little more unbearable? Well, we don't. We have them to safeguard the crew. A spaceship is a closed system. A contagious disease has nowhere else to go. Everybody gets it. She's better now. Fur's grown back. I fixed her leg. She's fine. It's impossible to tell. You got the ship. You got the cat from a space colony. There are diseases out there. New diseases. The locals develop an immunity. Now get the cat down to the lab. Double time. Sir, you're still here, Lister. What are you going to do with the cat? I'm going to have it cut up and run tests on it. Are you going to put it back together when you're finished? The captain closed her eyes. You're not, are you? Persisted Lister. You're going to kill it? Yes, Lister, that's exactly what I'm going to do. I'm going to kill it. Well, with respect, sir, said Lister, taking a cigarette from his hatband. What's in it for the cat? Lister smiled. The captain didn't. Lister, give me the cat. Lister shook his head. We'll find it anyway. No, you won't. Let me put it like this. The captain reclined back in her chair. Give me the frigging cat. Look, she's fine. There's nothing wrong with her. Give me the cat. Apart from anything else, she's pregnant. She what? I want that cat. Lister shook his head again. Do you want to go into stasis for the rest of the jag and lose 3 years' wages? No. Do you want to hand over the cat? No. Choose. Chapter 17. 11:05. Rimmer hurried out of the lift and down corridor 4, Delta 799, towards the exam hall. Under his high-neck zipped flight suit, he had everything he needed to pass the exam. On his right thigh, in tiny script, were all the basic principles of quantum mechanics. Time dilation formula covered his right calf. Heisenberg's uncertainty principle took up most of his left leg, while porous circuit theory and continuum hypothesis filled his forearms. Rimmer had never done anything illegal before. He hadn't so much as gotten a parking ticket on his home moon, Io. He never even fiddled his expenses, which quite frankly, even the captain did. He'd never cheated. Never. Not because he was of high moral character, but simply because he was scared. He was terrified of being caught. He walked into the clinically white exam room. The adjudicating officer glanced at his watch and nodded towards the one empty desk where an exam paper lay face down, and returned to his novel. He knows, thought Rimmer, his face glowing like Jupiter's red spot. He knows from the way I walked into the room. He knows. Rimmer ducked his body low into the chair, so just his head remained above the tabletop, and peered past the backs of the examinees in front of him, waiting for the adjudicator to make his move, waiting for him to leap forward and rip off his flimsy flight suit, exposing his shame, his illustrated body, Rimmer's cheating frame. For a full 10 minutes, Rimmer watched the officer quietly reading his novel. All right, thought Rimmer. Play it like that. The old cat and mouse game. Another 10 minutes went by. Still, the officer taunted him by doing nothing. Nothing. At 11:45, Rimmer decided the adjudicator didn't know, and it was safe to begin. Safe to cheat. He turned over the exam paper and started to read the questions. Something appeared to be sucking oxygen out of the room, and he seemed to be able to have to take 2 breaths to his usual one, just to keep conscious. Bum-bum, bum-bum, bum-bum. His heartbeat was deafening. When someone turned around, he was convinced they were going to say, "Can you keep your heartbeat down a bit? I'm trying to concentrate." Astronavigation Examination, Part 1, he read. Then underneath, answer 5 questions only. Just 5, thought Rimmer. I'm not going to make that mistake again. Question 1. As he looked at the question, the letters seemed to come off the page and sway out of focus, like distant figures disappearing in a heat haze on a desert road. He blinked. 2 tears of sweat ran past his eyes and tumbled onto the page. He ran his hands through his hair and wiped the perspiration off his face with his palms, then blinked twice more and brought the question into focus. Gibberish. Nothing but symbols. Oh God, thought Rimmer. I've forgotten how to read. He blinked several more times. Describe, using formula, where appropriate, the application of Deberg's theory of thermal induction in porous circuitry. That was his left forearm. The answer was there. The formula were there. All he had to do was slide back his sleeve, copy it all down, and he was 1/5 of his way into the officers' club. He looked at the other questions. There were 3 others he could do, and he could do them perfectly. 80%. He only needed 40. There was a whole hour to go. He was an officer. Arnold J. Rimmer, Astronavigation Officer, 4th Class. Already in his mind's eye, ticker tape was cascading from rooftops as he sat in the open-top limousine, waving to the adoring Ionian crowds. He snapped out of it. No time for complacency. 15 minutes per question. It was enough. "Let's go!" he screamed silently. He glanced nonchalantly around. No one was watching. Casually, he rested his hand on his wrist and slowly slid back the sleeve. The adjudicating officer turned a page in his novel. Rimmer looked down at his arm. An inky black blob stared up at him. His body had betrayed him. It had conspired to drench him in sweat. It had dissolved his best chance of ever getting that glimmering gold bar. He looked at his right hand. The answer to the question, describe using formula where appropriate the application of Deberg's theory of thermal induction in porous circuitry, was there, somewhere, hiding in the black blobby mess. Rimmer decided to take a chance in a million. It was the longest of long shots. With careful precision, he placed his inky hand on the answer sheet and pressed as hard as he could. Maybe, just maybe, when he removed his hand, his tiny copperplate writing would reassemble itself legibly on the page. He removed his hand. There, in the middle of the page, was a perfect palm print, with a single middle finger raised in mocking salute. An idiotic grin spread across Rimmer's face as he picked up his pen and signed the bottom of the page. Slowly, he clambered to his feet, saluted the adjudicating officer, and woke up on a stretcher in his way to the medical bay. Chapter 18. And also, I've had an exam like that before. It didn't go well. Although I didn't faint, just to be clear, but I did have a major panic attack and have to leave the room. For similar reasons. Except without the cheating part. I just panicked. Anyway. Petrovich led the way. Oh, thank you, Yatsura. Hiya, how you doing? Petrovich led the way and Lister followed, flanked by 2 unnecessary security guards. They stopped at the door to the stasis booth. Last chance, Lister. Where's the cat? Lister just shook his head. 3 years in stasis for some stupid flea-bitten moggy. Are you crazy? Lister wasn't crazy. Far from it. Yeah, I'm good, thank you. Just having fun reading. Same as usual. So, I hope you're doing well. I hope you're having a good day. Or had a good day, depending on the time zone. He'd first heard about the stasis punishment from Peterson. Now that the booths were no longer used for interstellar travel, their only official function was penal. Lister had spent 6 long, boring evenings shortly after Kachansky had finished with him, poring over the 3,000-page ship regulation tome, and finally cracked down on the obscure clause. The least serious crime for which stasis was a statutory punishment was breaking quarantine regulations. When Red Dwarf had stopped supplies at Miranda, he'd spent the last afternoon of his 3-day ship leave and all his wages buying the smallest, healthiest animal with the best pedigree he could find. For $3,000 he'd purchased a black long-haired cat with the show name Frankenstein. He'd had her inoculated for every known disease to ensure that she wouldn't actually endanger the crew, and smuggled her aboard under his hat. Yeah. It was tricky. On the one hand, he wanted to get caught with the cat, but he didn't want the cat to get caught and dissected. Eventually, he hit on the idea of having his photograph taken with the cat and sending the film off to be developed in the ship's lab. Finally, and much to his relief, they caught him. 3 years in stasis was everything he hoped for. Okay, his wages would be suspended, but it was a small price to pay for walking into a stasis booth and walking out a subjective instant later in orbit around the Earth. He'd hidden Frankenstein in the ventilation system. The system was so vast she would be impossible to catch, and also provided her with the access foraging raids to the ship's food stores. So, all in all, as Lister stepped into the stasis booth, he was feeling pretty pleased with himself, or at least as pleased as anyone could expect to feel who was actually as miserable as hell. Petrovich gave him one last chance to surrender the cat, which Lister naturally refused. As the cold metal door slammed behind him, he sat on the cold smoothness of the booth's bench and exhaled. Suddenly, a warm green light flooded the chamber, and Lister became a non-event mass with a quantum probability of 0. He ceased, temporarily, to exist. And here we go. We're getting to the actual meat of the story now, which I know took a while, but it's a build-up. Chapter 19. 17 minutes past 8. A red warning light failed to go on in the drive room, beginning a chain of events which would lead in a further 23 minutes to the total annihilation of the entire crew of Red Dwarf. 2018. Rimmer was released from the medical bay and told to take 24 hours sick leave. He was halfway along Corridor 5 Delta 333 on his way back to the sleeping quarters when he changed his mind and decided to spend the evening in a stasis booth. The medical orderly had informed him of the Lister situation, and that about capped a perfect day of the life of Arnold J. Rimmer. On top of everything, Lister was about to gain 3 years on him. By the time they got back to Earth, Lister would be exactly the same age, while he would be 3 years older. Even with his illicit stasis boothing, Rimmer could only hope to snatch 3 months, 4 at best. So Lister would gain 2 3/4 whole years, and he was already younger than Rimmer to start with. It seemed totally unfair. To cheer himself up, he decided to spend the evening in a state of non-being and vowed to begin work in the morning on an appeal against Lister's sentence so he could get him out of the stasis booth and start him aging again. Navigation Officer Henry Dubois knocked his black Connor coffee with 4 sugars over his computer console keyboard. As he mopped up the coffee, he noticed 3 red warning blips on his monitor screen, which he wrongly assumed were the result of his spillage. 2024. Rimmer got out of the lift on the main stasis floor and made a decision which, in retrospect, he would regret forever. He decided to comb his hair. 2031. The cadmium-2 coolant system, located deep in the bowels of the engine corridors, stopped functioning. 2036. Rimmer stood in the main washroom on the stasis deck and combed his hair. He combed his hair in the usual way, then decided to see what it looked like if he parted it on the opposite side. It didn't look very good, so he combed it back again. He washed his hands and dried them on a paper towel. If he had left at this point and gone directly to a stasis booth, he wouldn't have died, but instead he was seized by one of his frequent superstition attacks. He rolled up the paper ball into He rolled up the paper towel into a ball and decided he would... Can't English. Panda's lost English. He rolled the paper towel into a ball and decided if he could throw it directly into the disposal unit, he would eventually become an officer. He took careful aim, decided on an overarm shot, and tossed the paper ball. It missed by 8 feet. He retrieved the paper and decided if he got it in the disposal unit 3 times on the run, it would make up for the miss. The miss would then be struck from the superstitious record, and not only would he become an officer, but within 3 weeks he would get to have sex with a beautiful woman. Standing directly above the disposal unit, he dropped and retrieved the paper ball 3 times. Combing his hair one last time, he left the washroom, idly wondering who just the beautiful girl might be, and headed for a stasis booth. 2040. The cadmium-2 core reached critical mass and unleashed the deadly power of a neutron bomb. The ship remained structurally undamaged, but in 0.08 seconds, everyone on the engineering level was dead. 2040 and 2.7 seconds. Rimmer placed his hands on the wheel lock of the stasis booth 1344. He heard what sounded like a nuclear wind roaring down the corridor towards him. It was, in fact, a nuclear wind roaring down the corridor towards him. What now? He thought, rather irritably, and was suddenly hit full in the face by a nuclear explosion. 0.5 seconds before he expired, Rimmer realised he was going to die. His life didn't flash before him. He didn't think of his parents or his brothers or his home. He didn't think of the failed exams or the wasted time in the stasis booths. He didn't even think about his one brief love affair with Yvonne Magruder, the ship's female boxing champion. What he did, in fact, think of was a bowl of soup. A bowl of gazpacho soup. Then he died. Then everyone died. Chapter 20. Deep in the belly of Red Dwarf, safely sealed in the cargo hold, Frankenstein nibbled happily on a box of fish paste, while 4 tiny sightless kittens suckled noisily beneath her. And that's the end of Chapter 1. Death and how to cope with it. So I've still got an hour, so I'm happy to continue. Unless people want to ask questions or say anything. Or check out the redeem thingies I've now got, which are mostly just noises, but I wanted to put in a few things. But I'm pretty happy with the redeems. And I'm also getting emotes. So emotes are coming soon, which I'm also quite pleased about. So I'm looking forward to that. But anyway. Part 2. Alone in a godless universe and out of Shaken Vac. Chapter 1. The hatch to the stasis booth zuzzugged open, and a green Exit Now sign flashed on and off above Lister's head. Holly's digitised face appeared on the 8-foot square wall monitor. It is now safe for you to emerge from stasis. I only just got in. Please proceed to the drive room for debriefing. Holly's face melted into the smooth greyness of the blank screen. But I only just got in, insisted Lister. He walked down the empty corridor towards the express lift. What was this smell? A musty smell. Like an old attic. He knew that smell. It was just like the smell of his grandmother's cellar. He'd never noticed it before. And what was that noise? A kind of hissing buzz. The air conditioning? Why could he hear the air conditioning? He'd never heard it before. He suddenly realised that it wasn't what he was hearing that was odd. It was what he wasn't hearing. Apart from the white noise of the air conditioning, there was no other sound. Just the lonely squeals of his rubber soles on the corridor floor. And there was dust everywhere, curious mounds of white dust lying in random patterns. Where is everybody? Holly projected his face onto the floor in front of Lister. They're dead, Dave, he said solemnly. Who is? Asked Lister absently. Softly. Everybody, Dave. What? Lister smiled. Everybody's dead, Dave. What? Everybody? Yes, everybody's dead, Dave. What? Peterson? Yes, they're all dead. Everybody is dead, Dave. Burroughs? Holly sighed. Everybody is dead, Dave. Selby? Yes. Not Chen. Gordon Bennett. Holly snapped. Yes, Chen. Everybody. Everybody's dead, Dave. Even the captain? Yes, everybody. Lister squeaked along the corridor. A tick in his left cheek pulled his face into staccato smiles. He wanted to laugh. Everybody was dead. Why did he want to laugh? No, they couldn't all be dead. Not everybody. Not literally everybody. What about Rimmer? He's dead, Dave. Everybody is dead. Everybody is dead, Dave. Dave, everybody is dead. Holly tried all 4 words in every possible permutation with every possible inflection, finishing with dead, Dave, everybody is dead. Everybody is dead, Dave. Lister blankly looked in no particular direction, while his face struggled to find an appropriate expression. Wait, he said after a while. Are you telling me everybody's dead? Holly rolled his eyes and nodded. The enormous drive room echoed with silence. The banks of computers on autopilot whirred about their business. Ollie? Lister's small voice resonated in the giant chamber. What are all these piles of dust? The dust lay on the floors, on chairs, everywhere, all arranged in small, neat dunes. Lister dipped his fingers in one and tasted it. That, said Holly from his huge screen, is console executive Imran Sanchez. Lister's tongue hung guiltily from its mouth, and he wiped the white particles that had once formed part of console executive Imran Sanchez onto his jacket cuff. So what happened? Holly told him about the cadmium-2 radiation leak, how the crew had all been wiped out within seconds, how he'd headed the ship pell-mell out of the solar system to avoid spreading nuclear contamination, and how he'd had to keep Lister in stasis. Hey Patrick, how you doing? And had to keep Lister in stasis until the radiation had reached a safe background level. So, how long did you keep me in stasis? 3 million years, said Holly as casually as he could. Lister acted as if he hadn't heard. 3 million years? It had no meaning. If it had been 30 years, he would have thought, what a long time. But 3 million years? 3 million years was just stupid. He wandered over to the chair opposite the console he'd seen Kachansky operate. So, Chrissy's dead? He said, staring at the hummock of dust. Hey, Hater! Oh, thank you, Hater! Thank you for your Prime sub. You should really save it for people who, who do more though. People who like Germa. I appreciate it though. Really, and nice to see you. How you both doing anyway? How are you and Patrick doing? I hope you're both doing well. I hope you had a good day. Yeah, well. Oh, and yeah, I didn't get to... I thanked Smooth already because he told me the other day that he subbed to me, but it doesn't show up on... Nothing is showing up on the screens, on the streams. I don't know why. I need to fix these labels. I knew that... Oh, wait a minute. Give me a second. Maybe they are. It's just bent out of shape weirdly because of the stupid way that these things set up. I'm curious now. Yay. Okay, so it does work, kind of. It's just ridiculously... Oh, God. It's just ridiculously stretched. Ah. I'm probably... Sorry, Hater. I'm going to fix it afterwards. Yeah, well. I guess, technically. In a multiple manner of speaking. Or in one manner of speaking. But, psh. Oh, I should get a rim shot. Oh, damn. It's one redeem I didn't think to get. Oh well. Anyway, yeah, so nice to see you both here. Thanks for coming. Yeah, that's just yeah. I tried to edit it before, but because there wasn't something to fill it with, it doesn't actually, there's nothing to actually demonstrate with, whereas the follow one is easy to fill. This one, not so much, so I'm going to have to fix this myself in downtime. And also, it's weird. There we go. Well, now at least it looks slightly better from one angle. Yay. It's getting there, slowly but surely. Come on, a little bit more. You could do it. Almost. Can we just... There we go. Yay! Success. I don't know what happened with this one, though. That one should be cheer, and that one's not actually working very well, but oh well. Anyway. I'm glad that got sorted somewhat. I need to figure out what to do with the last cheer thing, though. Because that one should also be working, but apparently not. Apparently it doesn't like me for... Oh, wait, no, that's not... wrong thing, that's why. It's the wrong bloody... It says all-time top donator. Cheerer. Was there no most recent cheer? Come on. Most recent cheerer. Yay! Okay. Tell you what, Claire was the one that did this, so I'm going to just say thank you, Claire, again. And then I'll fix that later so that people can see. Ah, no. Don't do that. Give it to... I don't know off the top of my head what Crichton's thing is. Or Crichton's serial number. Crichton... I remember it's long and awkward and it has like an awkward middle name. 7QB something. Ah, come on. This is just gonna get even worse before it gets better. I think. Anyway, like I said, I'm very thankful to everyone that thinks I'm worth donating to, for real, but give it to people like Germa who actually do things. You know, the proper streamers, the ones who are cool. I don't know what I'm trying to say. The reputable ones, maybe. I thought you did watch Germa. What am I thinking of then? No, I've got friends that watch Germa. Oh well. Anyway, I think that works just about. Although it's still white, but I'll have to fix that later. Anyway, I just hope the names don't get any bigger. Otherwise, I'm gonna have to get Zvar. Yeah, I watch German archives too, so that makes sense. I'm gonna have to get Zvar to like stretch these things out a bit more, I think. Anyway, yeah, thank you, Hater, for both the sub and the cheer, and thank you for Claire before for the cheer, and thank you to Smooth for the other sub. I mean, it means a lot to me, so thank you. And now, where were we? So, Chrissy's dead, he said, staring at the hummock of dust. His voice tailed away. He tried to remember her face. He tried to remember the pinball smile. Well, if it's any consolation, said Holly. If she had survived, the age difference would be insurmountable. I mean, you're 24, she's 3 million. It takes a lot for a relationship with that kind of age gap to work. Lister wasn't listening. I always thought we'd get back together. I had this sort of plan, that one day I'd have enough money to buy a farm on Fiji. It's cheap land there, and in a half-assed kind of way. I always pictured she'd be there with me. This was getting morbid. Holly tried to lighten the atmosphere. Well, he said. She wouldn't be much use to you on Fiji now. No, said Lister. Not unless it snowed, said Holly, and you needed something to grit the path with. Lister screwed up his face in distaste. Holly? I'm sorry. I've been on my own for 3 million years. I'm just used to saying what I think. For some time now, the last 200,000 years to be exact, Holly had grown increasingly concerned about himself. For a computer with an IQ of 6,000, it seems to him that he was behaving in a more and more erratic way. In fact, he'd long suspected he'd gone a bit peculiar. Just as a bachelor who spends too much time on his own gradually develops quirks and eccentricities. So a computer who spends 3 million years alone in deep space can get, set in his ways. Become quirky. Go a little bit odd. Holly decided not to burden Lister with this anxiety, and hoped his oddness would eventually sort itself out, now he had a bit of company. Another slight concern, which he tried to put to the back of his RAM, was that for a computer with an IQ of 6,000, there was a rather alarming amount of knowledge he seemed to have forgotten. It wasn't on the whole important things, but it was nonetheless fairly disturbing. He knew, for instance, that Isaac Newton was a famous physicist, but he couldn't remember why. He couldn't remember the capital of Luxembourg. He could recall pi to 30,000 digits, but he couldn't say for absolute certain whether port was on the left side and starboard on the right, or whether it was the other way around. Who knocked Swansea City out of the FA Cup in 1967? He used to know. It was a mystery now. Loads of British references for people that are down on it. Obviously, none of this missing information was absolutely vital for the smooth running of a mining ship 3 million years out into deep space. But technically, he was supposed to know more or less everything, and frankly, there were some worrying gaps. He could remember, for instance, that in the Second Impression 1959 publication of Lolita by Vladimir Nabokov, printed in Great Britain by the Shenvel Press, London, Hertford and Narrow, page 60 was far and away the dirtiest page. But was Nabokov German or Russian? It totally eluded him. Maybe it wasn't important. Of course it wasn't important. Still, it was for Holly a source of perturbation. It's a source of perturbation, he thought. Then he wondered whether or not there was such a word as perturbation, or whether he'd made it just made it up. He didn't know that either. Oh, it was hopeless. Lister sat in the empty Copacabana Hawaiian. Oh. Hater, I've not even got subs yet. Really? And also the stupid alert widget is behind everything. Yeah, serious. Thank you, hater. Really. But at least wait until I've got subs ready. Until I've got emotes ready. They're coming like next week or so. But thank you, really. Thank you so much. Well, thank you, really. Thank you very much. I don't know how many other ways I can say that, but yeah, I mean it. Appreciate it a lot. Thank you. I don't remember what the hype train's at. I think it's... I know I didn't change the settings, so it's whatever is default. But I don't know what that is. Oh, okay. Yeah. It's multiple things in a short span of time. Okay. That makes more sense. Still need to actually... I don't think the last sub thing is ever going to work properly. It's just constantly broken. Well, even so, it's still a lot of money. I'm just going to leave that on so I can just grab it whenever I need to. Yeah, it's still your money, and it's still going towards me, so it's still, you know, means a lot. So thank you. Lister sat in the empty Copacabana Hawaiian cocktail bar and poured a triple whiskey into his double whiskey, then topped it with a whiskey. Absently, he lit the filter end of the cigarette and tried to assimilate all the information Holly had thrown at him. Everybody was dead. Everybody. He'd been in stasis 3 million years. 3 million years. Since one drunken night outside the Mary Lloyd off Regent Street, London, every step he'd taken had led him further and further away from home. First it was Mimas, then Miranda, and now he was 3 million years away. 3 million years out into deep space, further than any human being had ever been before. And he was totally alone. The enormity of all this was slowly beginning to sink in when Holly dropped the final bombshell, the one about the human race being extinct. What do you mean, extinct? Well, 3 million years is a very good age for a species. I mean, your average genus only survives a couple 100 years, 1,000 years max. And that's with a clean living species like dinosaurs. Dinosaurs didn't totally screw things up in the environment. They just went around quietly eating things. And even then, they didn't get to clock up to the one big mill. So the chances of the human race making it to the big 3000000 are practically non-existent. So I'm afraid you just have to face up to the very real possibility that your species is dead. Much to his surprise, Lister had let out a sob. Were you very close? Holly tilted his head sympathetically. Well, yeah, I suppose you must have been, really. That was a bit of an odd thing to say, he thought. Well, I'm thankful for everything regardless. It doesn't matter. Oh yeah, thank you. I wanted to get the both the H and the Starbug, so I just wanted to have it all set up correctly. And I would have had like I didn't know what else to get. I wanted to get what was it? Like Lister's Deerstalker hat thing, but I felt it was kind of silly, so in the whoosh, yeah. I'm glad it all set up correctly. Because it's all pretty. And it goes where you said, whoosh. Strategic placement. In truth, though, that I didn't mean that. It just conveniently worked that way. So I'm glad it did. Lister took out his shirt tail and blew his nose. So I'm the last human being alive? Yeah. You never think it's going to happen to your species, do you? It's always something that happens to somebody else's. Lister spent the next few days going to pieces. There seemed to be little point in getting dressed, and so he wandered around naked, swigging from a bottle of whiskey. He didn't know what to do. He didn't know if there was anything to do. And worst of all, he didn't much care. He slept wherever he fell, a painful, dreamless sleep. He hardly ate, and drank a small lock worth of whiskey. He didn't even like whiskey, but beer was too cumbersome to carry around in sufficient quantities to achieve oblivion. He lost a stone in weight and started shouting at people who weren't there. Every evening at around 5 p.m, he'd stagger stark naked into the drive room, waving his whiskey bottle dangerously in the air. He'd belch incoherent obscenities at Holly's huge visage on the gigantic monitor screen. Sometimes Lister imagined he'd heard the phone ring and he'd rush to pick it up. On the evening of the 5th day, as he staggered through the Red Dwarf shopping mall, toasting invisible crowds, he keeled over and blacked out. When he woke up, in the medical unit, a man with a H on his forehead was looking down at him with undisguised contempt. "You're a hologram?" said Lister. "So I am," said Rimmer. "You died in the accident?" said Lister. "So I did," said Rimmer. "What's it like?" "Death?" Rimmer mused. "It's like going on holiday with a group of Germans." He cradled his head in his hands. "I'm so depressed I want to weep. To be cut down in my prime. A boy of 31, with the body of a 30-year-old. It's unbearable. All my plans, my career, my future. Everything hinged on my being alive. It was mandatory. What happened to me? Did I black out?" "Excuse me, I'm talking about my being dead." "Sorry, I thought you'd finished." "I'm so depressed," repeated Rimmer. "So depressed." Over the next couple days, Lister slowly recovered in the medical bay. One morning, while Rimmer was off reading the How to Cope with Your Death booklet for the 15th time, Lister took the opportunity to ask Holly why he brought Rimmer back. "You've gone to pieces. You couldn't cope. You needed a companion." "But Rimmer!" "I did a probability study," lied Holly. "And it turns out Rimmer is absolutely the best person to keep you sane." "Rimmer?" I don't know. You're right, though. I did find that the book is so much sadder, front to back, than the actual sitcom. And it just, like, you think that Red Dwarf itself is poetically sad and funny in a poetically sad kind of way, or sad in a poetically funny kind of way. But the book just amps everything up. It just makes things so much sadder. Yeah, basically, that's all it does. And it's really kind of like, especially in the 2 sequel books, they get even worse. Like sad worse, not bad. I like both of them. Although I like Backwards more than I like The Last Human. Although it's hard to tell which one of those is more depressing. They're both pretty bad. Sad, even. Yeah, well, Yeah, there's no. He goes completely off the rails in the book, and I don't think the ending of Backwards is very sweet at all. I find it very bittersweet, even. But we'll save that because I plan on. I've got all 3 of the books, or technically all 4. This one's an omnibus. I've got all 4 of the books, so sooner or later I want to read them all. Just like I want to read Terry Pratchett and Hitchhiker's Guide. So yeah, but we'll save that for when we get to it. For now, we can just enjoy this misery. Holly's disembodied head tilted forward in a nod. Why not Peterson? Okay, have fun, hater. A man who buys a methane-filled 24-bedroomed bijou residence on an oxygenless moon whose only distinction is that it rotates in the opposite direction from its mother planet. You seriously expect me to bring him back to keep you sane? Gordon Bennett. He couldn't even keep himself sane, let alone anyone else. Yeah, but at least we had things in common. The only thing you had in common was your mutual interest in consuming ridiculous amounts of alcohol. Selby? Chen? Ditto. What about Chrissy? Dave, she finished with you. But Rimmer! Anyone would have been better than Rimmer. Anyone! Hermann Goering would have been better than Rimmer. All right, he was a drug-crazed Nazi transvestite, but at least we could have gone dancing. It was Jean-Paul Sartre, said Holly, thinking it may very well have been Albert Camus or Flaubert. Or perhaps it was even Sacha Distel, who said, hell was being trapped for eternity in a room with your mates. Sure, said Lister, but all Sartre's mates were French. I'm thinking, therefore I might possibly be, Rimmer said aloud as he padded silently around the sleeping quarters in his hologrammatic slippers. Try as he might, he couldn't even begin to grapple with the metaphysics of it all. I think I might be thinking, therefore I may possibly be being. To Rimmer, it was incomprehensible mumbo-jumbo. It was more baffling than the 3-dimensional foreplay diagrams in Lister's zero-gravity sex manual. He hated being dead. When he was a boy on Io, he remembered witnessing an Equal Rights for the Dead march, where holograms from all the moons of Jupiter had rallied for better conditions. The dead were generally given short shrift throughout the solar system. They were banned from most hotels and restaurants. They found it almost impossible to hold down a decent job, and even on television, although holograms featured occasionally, they were generally only included as token deads. Not a single golf club throughout known space had a dead member. The living had a very uncomfortable relationship with holograms in general, reminding them as they did of their own mortality. Also, there was a natural resentment towards deadies. To become a hologram outside of the Space Corps, you had to be one of the mega rich. The horribly expensive computer runtime and the massive power supply that was needed kept hologrammatic afterlife very exclusive indeed. Sitting on the shoulders of his brother, Frank, the 6-year-old Rimmer had booed and jeered with the rest of the crowd. Encouraged by Frank, they had personally actually thrown a stone, which had passed silently through the back of a hologram woman, marching in line. Deadies! Dirty deadies! And now he was one of them. A dirty deadie. Well, he wasn't going to let it get him down anymore. He wasn't going to let it stand in his way. He was dead. There was no use bleating about it. Was that a reason to quit? Did Napoleon quit while he was dead? Did Julius Caesar quit when he was dead? Well, yes. But that was before the hologram was invented. And that was the advantage he had over 2 of the greatest men in history. He may not have been the most successful person who ever lived when he was alive, but by God, he'd make up for that in his death. There was still that ziggurat to climb. There was still that gold bar to achieve. Nelson had 1 eye and 1 arm. Caesar was an epileptic. Napoleon, the man himself, suffered so badly from gonorrhea and syphilis he could barely pee. It seemed a veritable boon to Rimmer that the only disability he appeared to have was being dead. First thing tomorrow, he thought, I'm going to get the Scutters to paint a sign to hang over my bunk. And he pictured it in his mind's eye on polished oak. Tomorrow is the first day of the rest of your death. Chapter 3. A sound like a buzzsaw played through an open-air rock festival's PA system. Awoke Rimmer from a dream about his mother chasing him through a car park with a submachine gun. He swung his legs over the bunk and tried to locate the sound of the buzzsaw played through an open-air rock festival's PA system. It was Lister snoring. The snore drilled into Rimmer's skull, perfectly even, up and down, followed by a Qatari trill, and then the worst part of it all, the silence. The silence that always made him think Lister had stopped snoring. 1 second, 2 seconds, 3 seconds. He has! He stopped snoring! 4 seconds, 5, then the snort. Then the revolting, semi-choking sound as the mucus shifted around his cavernous nasal system and back into the perfectly even snore. Rimmer stood up and leaned over Lister's sleeping form. There was a half-empty metal curry tray lying on his chest, which rose and fell in rhythm with his grinding snore. Rimmer's first impulse was to reach over and pinch his nose, but of course he couldn't. He couldn't shake him either, or turn him on his side. He couldn't even take a thin piece of piano wire and slowly garrote him. If he hadn't been a hologram, this would definitely have been his favourite option. He arched over until his mouth was in whispering distance of Lister's ear. Then he screamed,
Stop snoring, you filthy son of a bastard, bastard, bastard!
Yeah. Lister jerked awake. Lister jerked awake. What? You were snoring? Eh? You were snoring. Oh, said Lister, lying back down. Sorry? Within 3 seconds, Lister was back asleep, and within 10, he was snoring again. The man was impossible to live with. He was an animal. He was an orangutan. He was a hippo. He was like one of those little grey monkeys you see at the zoo who openly masturbate whenever you go around with your great aunt Florrie. He was quite the most revoltingly heinous creature it had ever been Rimmer's misfortune to encounter. What further proof did you need that God did not exist? As if he'd allow this onion, to become the last surviving member of the human race. He symbolised everything that was cheap and low and nasty and tacky about mankind. Why him? A man whose idea of a change of clothing is to turn his t-shirt inside out, so that the stench was on the outside. Who used orange peel and curry cartons as makeshift ashtrays? Who would frequently tug out a huge great lump of rotting fetid meat from one of his cavities in his teeth, and announced proudly that it could feed a family of 4. Who bit his nails, his toenails. He would actually sit there with his foot in his mouth and trim his nails by biting them. My brother used to do that. And then, the most hideous thing of all, he would eat the cuttings. Eating your toenails, for God's sake. He didn't do that. This was the last man, the last human being, a person who could belch La Bamba after 11 pints of lager, a man who ate so many curries he sweated Madras sauce. Revolting. His bedsheets looked like someone had just given birth to a baby on them, and he destroyed things. Not on purpose, he was just a clumsy, slobby, ham-fisted son of a prostadroid. Somehow he always destroyed things. Rimmer remembered once showing him a photograph of his mother, and 5 seconds later, turned round to see him absently using it as a toothpick. He once lent him his favourite album, and when he came back, there was a footprint over Reggie Dixon's Hammond organ, and raspberry jam seeds buried in the groove. How is that possible? To get jam on a record? Who listens to Hammond organ music and eats raspberry jam? Excuse me. And the inner sleeve was missing. And there was a telephone number and a doodle on the lyrics sheet. Destroyed. How could anyone possibly live with this man? How could it be that here, snoring like an asthmatic warthog, was the very last representative of the human race? How is it possible that this man was alive while he was dead? How? 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 Chapter 4. Only 2 days earlier, Lister had finally got round to collecting all of his personal belongings from vacuum storage, and now here he was, sitting on his bunk, packing them all up again to take them back to vacuum storage. He'd asked Holly to turn the ship around and head back to Earth. Maybe the human race was extinct. Maybe it wasn't. Maybe they'd evolved into a race of super beings. Maybe they'd wiped one another out in some stupid war, and the ants had taken over. But where else was there to go? Earth was home. He had to find out if it still existed, even if it did take another 3 million years to get back. So he decided to go back into stasis. What else was there to do? He certainly had no intention of hanging around with only a highly neurotic dead man for company. He looked down at his vacuum storage trunk. He really did have a pretty feeble collection of belongings. 4 cigarette lighters, all out of gas. A copy of the pop-up Kama Sutra, Zero Gravity Edition. A hard ball of well-chewed gum, which he'd bought in a bar in Mimas from a guy who'd guaranteed it had once been chewed by Chelsea Brown, the famous actress. A pair of his adoptive grandmother's false teeth, which he'd kept for 2 reasons. A, sentimental, and B, they were just the thing for opening bottles of beer. His bass guitar with 2 strings, both G. 350 0G football magazines, and his entire collection of Rastabilly Skank DAT tapes. And of course there were his goldfish. He wandered over to the 3-foot-long oblong tank and peered into the murky green water. At first he couldn't see a thing through the slimy silt. He flicked on the underwater illumination switch and pressed his face to the side of the tank. Gradually, through the gloom, he made out a moving silhouette. As his eyes adjusted, he saw it was Lennon, swimming happily in and out of the fake plastic Vatican. But he couldn't see McCartney. He rolled up his sleeve and swirled his arm around in the stagnant filth, releasing a pungent, evil smell. Finally, he located the missing fish, lodged in the papal balcony above St. Peter's Square. It was dead. He shook his head and smacked the fish violently against the corner of Rimmer's slanting architect's desk, and held the fish to his ear and listened. Nothing. Picking up Rimmer's Space Scout knife, he flicked out a blade and opened up the fish like a watch. There was the problem. A loose battery. He prodded it back into place and snapped the fish closed. McCartney blinked back into life. He dropped the Piscine droid back into the water and watched as it happily swam off through the arch of the plastic Sistine Chapel backwards. Yes, said Lister. Brutal. Rimmer walked in through the hatchway and spotted Lister's vacuum trunk. What are you doing? Rimmer listened in mounting disbelief as Lister outlined his plan. What about me? What am I supposed to do on my own for 3 million years? Well, I dunno. I haven't really thought about it. No, exactly. Come on. You can't expect me to hang around here. Why don't you get Ollie to turn you off till we get back home? Because, Dingleberry Brain, Rimmer rose to his feet, if by some gigantic fluke the Earth still exists, and if, by an even greater stretching of the laws of probability, the human race is still alive, and if during the 6 million years we've been away they haven't evolved into some kind of super race, and we can still understand them, if all that comes to pass, when I get back to Earth, for the reasons for me being brought back as a hologram will no longer apply, and my personality disc will be neatly packed away in some dusty vault that nobody ever goes in, and that will be the end of Rimmer Arnold J. You never know. When we get back, it might turn out they found a cure for death. Rimmer sucked in his cheeks and rolled his eyes around in their sockets. Well, you never know, said Lister feebly. Oh yes, I expect doctors' waiting rooms are absolutely heaving with cadavers. Ah, Mrs. Harrington, dropped dead again, eh? Never mind. Rimmer mined, scribbling a prescription. Take 2 of these 3 times a day and try not to get run over by another bus. I'm going into stasis, said Lister, picking up his vacuum trunk. And that's that? You don't seriously expect me to spend the rest of my life alone here with you? Why not? 50 odd years, alone with you. What's wrong with that? Lister stopped and put down his trunk. I think we should get something straight. I think there's something you don't understand. What? The thing is, said Lister as kindly as he could, I don't actually like you. Rimmer stared, unblinking. This really was news to him. He didn't like Lister, but he always thought Lister liked him. Why on Io wouldn't he like him? What was there not to like? Since when? He said, with a slight crack in his voice. Since the second we first met. Since a certain taxi ride on Mimas. That wasn't me. The guy in the false mustache who went to an android brothel. That wasn't me. Rimmer was outraged at Lister's accusation. Even though it was true, he felt it was so out of kilter with his own image of himself. He was able to summon up genuine indignation, as if he, Arnold J. Rimmer, would pay money to a lump of metal and plastic to have sexual intercourse with him. It just wasn't like him. True, he did it, but it wasn't like him. I've never been to an android brothel in my life, and if you so much as mention it again, I'll... Rimmer faltered. He suddenly realised there wasn't much he could do to Lister. I don't get it. What point are you trying to make? The point I'm trying to make, you dirty son of a fetid whoremongers bitch, is that we're friends. Rimmer smiled as warmly as he could to help disguise the massive incongruity he'd walked himself into. Sniff your coffee and wake up, Rimmer. We are not friends. I know what you're referring to, said Rimmer, nodding. Rimmer nodded his head vigorously. It's because I gave you a hard time since you came aboard, isn't it? But don't you see? I had to do that. To build up your character. To change the boy into a man. Oh, do smeg off. I always thought you saw me as a sort of big brother character. Heck, we don't always get on, but then, what brothers do? Cain didn't always get on with Abel. He killed him. Absolutely. But underneath all that, they were still brothers with brotherly affection. Heaven knows I didn't always get on with my brothers. In fact, once, when I was 14, I needed mouth-to-mouth resuscitation, after all three of them held my head down a toilet for rather too long. But we laughed about it afterwards when I'd started breathing again. You're not going to persuade me not to go into stasis? I am not spending the rest of my life with a man who keeps his underpants on coat hangers. Rimmer held up his outspread palms in a gesture of innocence. I'm not trying to persuade you. Then what's all this about? I don't know. I'm not sure what anything's about anymore. Here comes the emotional blackmail, thought Lister. It's not easy, being dead. Lister grunted. It's so hard to come to terms with, death. Your own death. You have plans. So many things you wanted to do, and now... Look, I'm sorry you're dead, okay? It was cruddy luck. But you've got to put it behind you. You're completely obsessed by it. Obsessed? It's all you ever talk about. Well, pardon me for dying. Frankly, Rimmer, it's very boring. You're like one of those people who are always talking about their illness. Well, said Rimmer, his eyes wide in astonishment. It's just boring. Change the disc. Flip the channel. Death isn't a handicap it once was. For Smeg's sake, cheer up. Well, said Rimmer, and he couldn't think of anything else to say. So he said, well, again. And quite honestly, the prospect of hanging around and having to listen to you whining and moaning and bleating and whinging for the next 3/4 of a century because you happen to have snuffed it does not exactly knock me out. Well, said Rimmer, 50 years alone with you. I'd rather drink a pint of my own diarrhea. Well, or a pint of somebody else's, come to that, every hour, on the hour for the next 70 years. I can't believe, Rimmer was shaking, you've just said that. Holly faded into focus on the sleeping quarters vid screen. Oi, he said, rather uncomputer-like. I've just opened the radiation seals to the cargo decks, and there's something down there. What do you mean? Some kind of life form. What is it? I can only see it on the heat scanner. I don't know what it is. I only know what it isn't. What isn't it then? It isn't human. Lister clutched the bazookoid. Chapter 5. Lister clutched the bazookoid, the heavy portable rock-blasting mining laser, to his chest and checked again that the pack on his back was registering full charge. Light flitted through the wire mesh of the rickety lift as it clumsily jutted its way down the bowels of the ship. 3 miles of lift shaft, over 500 floors, most of them stretching the 6-mile length of the ship. These were the cargo decks, where all the supplies were stored. The tiny exposed cage shuddered and rocked slowly past floor after floor. Down. Perhaps 20 floors of food, vacuum sealed, tin mountains stretching out beyond vision. Down. 4 floors of wood, 1,000,000 chopped trees stacked in silent pyramids. Down. Floors of mining equipment. Down. Floors of raw silicates mined from Ganymede. Down. Floors of water stored and still in enormous glass tanks. And down. And the only sound was the metallic squealing of the lift cable as it plunged them deeper and deeper into the gloomy abyss. I don't know why I'm scared. I'm a hologram. Whatever it is, it can't do anything to me. Thanks. That makes me feel really secure. The gloom enveloped them. The light on Lister's mining helmet cut only 20 feet into the darkness. Lister flipped down the helmet's night visor and switched the beam to infrared. Down. Then something strange. These floors were empty. Hundreds of cubic miles of supplies were missing. Food, metal, wood, water, missing. It's gone. What has? Rimmer squinted blindly into the darkness. Everything? What do you mean everything? All the supplies? The last 10 floors, they were all empty? I'm so glad I'm already dead. I'm so glad. Do you want to shut the smeg up? Down. Down. In the bottom right-hand corner of Lister's visor, a small green cross began to flicker. Oh, Smeg, there is something here? Where? The cross crept up on the visor. Lister wanted to say, the next floor? But he couldn't. He couldn't speak. The lift coughed to a stop. The whine of the motor faded to nothing. There it was, stretching before them, 6 miles in length, half-lit and desolate. A huge, impossible city. A city! The lift doors folded open. Cha-chunk! And they stepped out into the rough, cobbled street. Crudely fashioned igloo-shaped dwellings lined the roadway, hammocks of carved wood without doorways. Hummocks of curved wood without doorways. Each had only a slit, perhaps a yard wide and less than a foot high, cut 6 feet from the ground. Lister checked the charge on the bazookoid backpack, and they both started cautiously down the street. Before them was a crossroads. The igloo hummocks stretched out in every direction. The flashing cross in Lister's visor throbbed more insistently and indicated they should turn right. What is this place? Lister slung the bazookoid over his shoulder and scrambled up one of the hummocks. He poked his head through the slit and peered into the dim interior. Some kind of house, but it's tiny. Just enough room for 2 people to crouch in and peer out the gash at the top. Whatever lived in here really liked confined spaces. Built into a tiny recess in the wall was a small bookcase containing 6 books. Lister reached in and managed to grab 3 of them. He dropped down from the hummock. Rimmer peered over his shoulder as he opened each book in turn. Every single page in every book was blank. Lister slipped the books into his haversack, grabbed the bazookoid, rechecked the charge, and they moved off again. After 5 minutes or so, they reached a square. Welcome back, hater. After 5 minutes or so, they reached a square. Rows of benches faced a television screen attached to a video recorder. Lister ejected the disc. It bore the ship's regulation supply logo. Oh yeah, no. I don't actually remember now. Don't remember what I was yelling at. Oh well. It was me reading a line from the book. And how did the dungeon go? I hope it was successful. I just wanted to move the mic out of the way so I wasn't yelling into it at full volume. Because I don't think the compressor works that well. Oh, that sucks. I hope it was a learning experience for them at least. But getting stuck with newbie healers that can't take the strain is Never fun. What is it? Asked Rimmer. The Flintstones? They turned left. More hummocks. Another square, but this time set out like a street cafe. Tables with parasols, wooden chairs, and in the centre, a table fully laid with 2 gold candelabra, both lit. A meal, half eaten, sat steaming on a plate. The blip on Lister's visor was pulsing faster than ever. It's here! Lister's finger tightened on the beam button of the bazookoid. Whatever it is, it's right here! A flash. A pink blur flashed from the top of a hammock, pinning Lister to the floor and sending the weapon skittering across the cobbles. Rimmer watched, half paralysed, as the pink neon-suited man with immaculate coiffure sniffed Lister, looked up with a puzzled expression, sniffed him more deeply, and finally got to his feet, took out a clothes brush, and smoothed out his suit. "Sorry, man," he said. "I thought you were food." And good, I'm glad they managed. Chapter 6. From the moment he discovered that the Cadmium-2 had achieved critical mass, Holly had less than 15 nanoseconds to act. He sealed off as much of the ship as possible, the whole cargo area and the ship's supply bay. Simultaneously, he set the drive computer to accelerate far beyond the dull green-blue disk of Neptune in the distance and out into the abyss of unknown space. Then he read the Bible, the Quran, and other major religious works. He covered Islam, Zoroastrianism, Zoroastrianism, Mazdaism. I can't pronounce any of these. Yeah, it is a little bit weird to hear them swear. I mean, Zarathustrianism, Dharma, Brahmanism, Hinduism, Vedanta, Jainism, Buddhism, Hinayana, Mahayana, Sikhism, Shintoism, Taoism, and Confucianism. I think I'm Confucians. Definitely confused. Then he read all of Marx, Engels, Freud, Jung, and Einstein. And, to kill the remaining few nanoseconds, he skipped briefly through Joe Clump's Zero-G football. It's a funny old game. At the end of this, Holly came to 2 conclusions. First, given the whole sphere of human knowledge, it was still impossible to determine the existence or not of God. And second, Joe Clump should have stuck to having his hair permed. In the hold, Frankenstein's 4 offspring began to breed. Each litter produced an average of 4 kittens, 3 times a year. At the end of the first year, the second generation of kittens started to breed too. They also produced 3 annual litters of 3 to 4 kittens. Yeah, I mean, it was written in 1989, so I'm not completely surprised. But, yeah. Sadly. I don't think they've used it. They also used it in the original series, so yeah. I don't think they'd do it in modern times. But I've not seen any of the new series, so. When Frankenstein died at the great old age of 14, she left behind 198,732 cats. 198,732 cats who continued to breed. Yeah, oh yeah, he mentioned Hermann Goering. So he said Hermann Goering, who was a drug-crazed Nazi transvestite. And yeah, he was a cross-dresser, from what I remember. He said at least if he was, he could still go dancing with him. Still, Red Dwarf accelerated. Holly witnessed at first hand phenomena which had never been witnessed before. He saw phenomena which had only been guessed at by theoretical physicists. He saw a star form. He saw another star die. He saw a black hole. He saw pulsars and quasars. He saw twin and triplet sun systems. He saw sights Copernicus would have torn his eyes out for, but all the while he couldn't stop thinking how bad that book was by Joe Clump. The cats continued to breed. Red Dwarf continued to accelerate. The 40-square-mile cargo hold was seething with cats. A sea of cats. A sea of cats sealed from the radiation-poisoned decks above with nowhere to go. Only the smartest, the biggest, and the strongest survived. The mutants. The mutants who had rudimentary fingers instead of claws, who stood on their hind legs and clubbed rivals to death with crudely made clubs, who found the best breeding mates, and bred. Felis erectus was born. Red Dwarf, still accelerating, passed 5 stars in concentric orbits, performing a breathtaking, mind-boggling stellar ballet. Not that Holly noticed. He'd been on his own now for 2 million years and was no longer interested in mind-boggling stellar ballets. What he was really into was Netta Musket novels. The young doctor had just told Jenna she had only 3 years to live as he held her in his powerful masculine grip, his dark, brooding eyes piercing her very soul. Outside, the suns danced into a perfect pentagon and span, end over end like a gigantic Catherine wheel. But Holly didn't see it. He was too busy reading Dr. Darling. Then there was a plague, and the plague was hunger. Less than 30 cat tribes now survived, roaming the cargo decks on their hind legs in a desperate search for food. But the food was gone. The supplies were finished. Weak and ailing, they preyed at the supply hold's silver mountains, huge towering acres of metal rocks which, in their pagan way, the mutant cats believed watched over them. Amid the wailing and the screeching, one cat stood up and held aloft the sacred icon. The icon which had been passed down as holy and would one day make its use known. It was a piece of V-shaped metal with a revolving handle on its head. He took down a silver rock from the silver mountain, while the other cats cowered and screamed at the blasphemy. He placed the icon on the rim of the rock and turned the handle. And the handle turned, and the rock opened. And inside the rock was alphabety spaghetti in tomato sauce. And in the other rocks were even more delights: sugar-free baked beans, chicken and mushroom toasty toppers, faggots and rich meaty gravy. That's meatballs, just saying. All sealed in perfect vacuums, preserved from the ravages of time. God had spoken, and Felis sapiens was born. Holly was gurning. He was pulling his pixelized face into the most bizarre and ludicrous expressions he could muster. He'd been gurning now for nearly 2,000 years. It wasn't much of a hobby, but it helped pass the time. He was beginning to worry that he was going computer senile, driven crazy by loneliness. What he needed, he decided, was a companion. He would build a woman. A perfectly functioning human woman, capable of independent thought and decision-making, identical to a real woman in the minutest detail. The problem was he didn't know how. He didn't even know what to make the nose out of. So he gave up on the whole scheme as a bad idea and started gurning again. And there was a war between the cats, a bloody war that laid waste many of their number. But the reason was good, the cause was sensible, the principle was worth fighting over. It was a holy war. Some of the cats believed the one true father of catkind was a man called Cloyster, who saved Frankenstein, the Holy Mother, and was frozen in time by the evil men who sought to kill her. One day, Cloyster would return to lead them to Birth, the planet where they could make their home. The other cats believed in exactly the same thing, except they maintained the true father of catkind was a man called Clister. They spent the best part of 2,000 years fighting over this huge, insuperable theological chasm. Millions died. Finally, a truce was called. Commandeering the fleet of shuttles from the docking bay, half the cats flew off in one direction in search of Cloyster and the promised planet, and the other half flew off in the opposite direction in search of Clister and the promised planet. Behind them, they left the ones who were too weak to travel, the old, the lame, the sick, and the dying. And one by one they died. Soon only 2 remained, one a cripple, one an idiot. They snuggled together for warmth and companionship, and one day, to the cripple and the idiot, a son was born. Still kind of dark. But now at least we know how the cat was formed. 7. So the last human being alive, a man who died, and a creature who evolved from cats, stood around the metal table that was bolted to the floor of the sleeping quarters and listened to a computer with an IQ of 6,000 who couldn't remember who'd knocked Swansea out of the 1967 FA Cup, explain what the hell was happening. So he's a cat, said Lister for the 14th time. The cat took out a small portable steam iron from his jacket and started pressing the sleeve. Outwardly, at least, he was human in appearance. There was a slight flattening of his face, his ears were a little higher on his head, and two of his gleaming upper teeth hung down longer and sharper than the others, so they peeked whitely over his lips whenever he grinned, which he did a lot. He didn't seem to have a trace of superego. He was all ego and id, monumentally self-centered. And if he'd been human, you would have described him as vain. But you couldn't apply human values to cats. There seemed to be very little connection between the two cultures. The invention which proved the turning point in cat history wasn't fire or the wheel. It was the steam-operated trouser press. Getting information out of the cat wasn't easy. If you asked him too many questions, he just got bored and went off to take one of the 5 or 6 showers he appeared to need daily. He didn't have a name. He found it difficult to understand the idea. He was of the unshakable conviction that he was the absolute centre of the entire universe, the reason for its being, and the notion that someone might not know who he was beyond his comprehension. What about relationships? Lister had persisted. Relationships? The cat rolled the word around on his tongue. The cats had learned English from the vast number of video discs and training films that were stored in the cargo decks, waiting for delivery to Triton. But most human concepts eluded them. Yeah, you know, between a man cat and a woman cat, what do you call each other? Hey, you! What? In the entire relationship, you never refer to each other by name. You know how long a cat relationship lasts? 3 minutes. 5 minutes fine, 2nd minute you feel trapped. 3rd minute you gotta leave. The very thought of a relationship which lasted longer than 3 minutes brought the cat out in a cold sweat, and he had to go and take another hot shower. And so the evening progressed. When the cat wasn't showering or snoozing, he was preening. He appeared to have secreted about his immaculate person an arsenal of combs and brushes, none of which seemed to spoil the line of his immaculate pink suit. For the most part, details of the cat's background remained obscure. Oh, yeah, shit, it's already, okay. I'll finish this chapter and then, call it here. Thanks, Krista. Sorry. For the most part, details of the cat's background remained obscure. He found the concept of parents bewildering. He couldn't believe that there was ever a time he wasn't born. When he put his mind to it, he did recall 2 other cats who used to be around, but most of the time they'd avoided each other. One of them, he reckoned, had probably been his mother, because she wouldn't sleep with him. In fact, she'd got quite angry at his approaches and hit him on the head with a large frying pan. I do like this book. I like most of the stuff I've read, so yeah. The other must have been his father, a deeply religious cat who was constantly reciting the 7 cat commandments. Thou shalt not be cool, thou shalt not be vain, thou shalt not have more than 10 suits, thou shalt not partake of carnal knowledge with more than 4 members of the opposite sex at any one session, thou shalt not slink, thou shalt not hog the bathroom, and thou shalt not steal another's hair gel. In the dark ages of religious intolerance, these laws were laid down by cat priests to keep their race in check. It was only through denying certain lusts, certain natural urges to be cool and stylish, they said, that a cat could find redemption. Strict punishments were meted to their transgressors. Cats caught slinking in public would have their shower units removed. Cats condemned as vain would have their hairdryers confiscated and be forced to wear fashions some up to 2 seasons old. Paisley? With thin lapels and turn-ups? Well, that was so last spring! Please, no, have mercy! The cat finally tired of the relentless questioning and announced it was time for its main mid-evening snooze. He casually leapt up onto the top of Rimmer's locker, curled up in the impossibly small space, and fell immediately into a deep and satisfying sleep. What are we going to do with him? Rimmer asked. Lister sat at the table playing with his locks. He was thinking. Watching Lister thinking always reminded Rimmer of a huge old rusty tractor trying to plough furrows in a concrete field. Finally, he looked up. He's coming with us, back to Earth. Disappointment filtered through Rimmer's brittle smile. You're still going into stasis then? You're taking him with you? Why not? No reason, he thought. No reason at all, so long as you don't give two short smegs about Arnold J. Rimmer. And that's on to chapter 8. Just where where I finished last time too. So yeah, made good progress. Anyway, that's it for the night then, guys. Thank you very much for joining me. It's much appreciated. I say that a lot. I need to find new things to say. But yeah, it's lovely to have you all here and lovely to have you all listening. And I hope it was semi-peaceful to listen to. And what? A dad joke. I don't have many dad jokes on hand. I mean, what do I look like? A punda? See? Anyway. Yeah. So thank you very much for joining me, guys. Thank you very much to Hater and to Claire and to Smooth for the bits and the subscriptions and everything. And yeah, so thank you very much for being here, and I hope to see you again next time. I'm streaming Psychonauts again tomorrow for those that are interested in that. I'm on to Eddie, I think. Spanish. I don't know. Anyway, quite close to the end, I think. Yeah, lots more salt incoming. Probably. I don't know. I don't think it'll be as bad as the geometry in the last level. I hope. But anyway, yeah. So I hope to see people here again for another reading stream next week. And other than that, thank you very much. And I hope you all have a good night and sweet dreams and whatever else, like I'm planning to. Good night, everyone. Goodbye for now. Oh, wait. I should probably raid someone, shouldn't I? I keep forgetting about that I can do. I think Terra's streaming, I think. So, I guess, if you want to stick around, then we can stream him. But I'll sort that out, I guess. Think Twitch. Yeah, okay. So, let's head over there then. Night, guys. Thanks again. Bye.